there's been a couple times where I've definitely made girls feel awkward. And again, if you want to hear the story, I mean, it's super cringy, like very cringy. It involves me being naked in a heater. It's fucking.
It's fine. It's fine.
I think that having really good conversations about consent and then the benefits to both parties of consent are really good ways to bring people's ideas around. But I think constantly like hammering a person, saying like, you're basically a predator, right? You're basically a predator, right? You might have raped women before, not known it, right? Is a really negative way to go about this conversation, and probably like unintentionally triggers the fuck out of a lot of people listening to it. Just as my offering.
Well,
fair enough. Go ahead, Destiny.
I was going to say, so when it comes to sexual relationships, okay, people bring up power dynamics a lot. Power dynamics aren't really like the be all and end all for whether or not like a sexual relationship is healthy or unhealthy. They're a huge influence though, and it's something to take note of. So like when we look at like sexual relationships, I think we're looking for like there's like three things that I kind of look for, two big things I look for, right? You're looking for a type of consent that is informed and non-coercive. So when we say informed, we mean that like the person understands the full ramification of their actions. And then when we say non-coercive, we mean that that person could choose or could not choose to engage in that without fear of repercussion. So this is why, for instance, like your boss propositioning you for sex or a teacher propositioning you for sex is a hard area because it could be coercive and you have no way of determining that. So we would say that type of sexual interaction is not okay. I think that there are some types of sexual interactions that are ripe for abuse, and celebrity fan interactions are absolutely that. But I don't think that they're on their face immoral just because the potential for abuse exists. So for example, there exists class dynamics between people. If you are in if you are in cisgender heterosexual relationships, there's likely going to be some physical power dynamic that is very real. There's all sorts of power dynamics that we have to navigate around. What we're curious about is, are we losing the ability to make an informed, non-coercive decision? So like the way that you might look at this is, let's say that you have a fan, you're talking to a fan, and you notice like this person seems pretty uncomfortable, but I'm almost positive I could get this girl to fuck me because I know she's going to feel really bad saying no because of who I am. If you're engaging in that type of a like interaction, you're probably being coercive. If you weren't famous, they would probably say no. I think that's the type of thing that you look for when you're interacting with a fan. The idea that like just because you're famous and just because they're a fan, you could never have a sexual relationship, I think is a really immature way to view those types of sexual dynamics. But I think you definitely have to be aware of the potential for abuse because you might coerce somebody unintentionally into doing something that they might otherwise say no to. This is why things like enthusiastic consent are so important, or affirmative consent that you gain before like an actual sexual interaction, in my opinion.
And Destiny, I agree with you. Oh, I'm so sorry.
I'm sorry. Prima, that's what I was saying before, though. There's an echo again.
Yeah, Kyosan. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's exactly. So again, English not being my first language, when I say intent and sobriety, those perhaps were not the best words, but I think that within sobriety, that's exactly what Destiny was saying, is that there needs to be, and I'm not saying that like you need to sign contracts and like have a formal conversation just to bang, but knowing what the intent and knowing where somebody is coming from, or what they're trying to get, I'm sorry, it's so late, what they're trying to get out of a relationship is really important to identify. And if you don't have both of those, I think it's immoral.
So without consent is immoral. That's what we agree on, right?
Well, no, consent is a really dumb, like the idea that people are just like, you need consent. I don't agree with that. I think that consent on its own is meaningless because you can get a lot of people to consent to stuff that they're not comfortable with. For instance, so like I think that you should never, ever try to negotiate anything sexual in the heat of the moment. I think that all of that stuff should be talked about in advance because you can get a lot of people to agree. You can fuck, for instance, a lot. I don't know if I'm giving like predator advice here. You can fuck a lot of people without a condom if you offer in the heat of the moment, like, hey, like we should just do it raw. Like I think it'd be cool. But if you talk to them prior to that and they say like, I'm not really okay with that, people are not making like the best types of decisions in like other states of mind. So I think it's really good to negotiate this type of stuff beforehand and not try to do it on the fly, unless it's with somebody that you really trust, or like it's like in a relationship or somebody you're a close friend with or something.
Okay, well, have you ever like actually tried to have a conversation with somebody like that though? That's
absolutely.
Yes,
yeah.
Like,
have you not? Like, bro, like,
this and that? No, I just like it to flow. That's me personally.
I understand that.
Awkward for like 2 seconds or whatever, but it makes it really nice when you're not worried about whether or not someone's consenting to having sex with you. It's pretty nice not to to know you're not raping somebody.
I understand for some people it can be like really exciting to do like heat of the moment stuff, and there is like some level of excitement there, and everybody's different. But like for me personally, when you talk about it like all in advance, it is so nice to know like going in like, all right, we're going to be at this event, we're going to be in the hotel Saturday, Sunday, you're down for this, and this, like boom, like there's no wasted time. You don't have to worry about the other person, like maybe they're really not into that, like are they going to be okay with this, blah blah blah. Now obviously you should still be updating your making sure that they're so comfortable with everything, but I don't know, I feel like getting all of that out of the way in the beginning just makes the actual encounter so much easier and so much less stressful.
Hold on.
Stop. Let's let Kino in, then Samantha.
Thank you. That's also why one of the reasons that I use sobriety specifically is that in the context of consent, again, your fan can consent to something but still have a psychological barrier that they wouldn't agree to it otherwise, and a number of other things that we've already talked about. I'm not going to dive into that. So sobriety, not necessarily consent, but to University's point, there is a thing called non-consensual consent, and that is where you do have an initial conversation to make sure that certain scenes that could happen, will happen, you're okay with them and you do consent with them. So I think that coming from a place where like you have to have this conversation in order to bang somebody, like that's not true. And having that conversation, I think, takes a lot of weight off of it so that you are enabled to do things that might otherwise be more morally challenging.
Yeah.
Then,
All right.
like,
Let's go.
and then beyond.
Let's go.
Sorry.
Oh, you're heading out. Oh, thank you. Sorry.
Okay, so
But anyway, Samantha, go ahead.
okay, so what I was gonna say is like it's really cool for like heat of the moment. A lot of people think that's cool stuff or whatever, but what a lot of people don't understand with power dynamics and stuff is, and it's completely unintentional and a lot of times unnoticed, but it's like unintentional and unnoticed coercion where it's kind of like a pressure. You're already in that heat of the moment or whatever, and it's like, oh well, they want to do this, so I must do that.
Yeah, so that's definitely something that can happen. I would argue, that sounds kind of shitty, but I do think that you should try your best to be aware of when somebody might put you in that situation. All you can do if you're the person that's like initiating the sexual encounter is it's really nice to be aware of when you could be unintentionally coercive, and then try to get ahead of that. So here's an example for me. So if I meet somebody on Tinder, or if I'm meeting like a fan or a friend or somebody at an event or whatever, oftentimes, if you pose a question to somebody that's yes or no, sometimes they will be too uncomfortable to say no. So what you can do is you can give them an out. So like an example would be like at the end of the night, let's say that I usually drive. Let's say that we finish eating and I'm in the car. Something I might say is like, hey, so do you want to come back to my place? And instead of just leaving it there, because it can be kind of awkward for the girl to be like, oh, no, you might say something like, hey, do you want to come back to my place, or do you have something going on in the morning? Just giving them that out like makes them feel more comfortable, like, oh, I have something going on in the morning, so that if they're not into it, they don't feel like they're like rejecting your offer. They're just like accepting like a different option. And I think being aware of like ways that you can give people outs like that is like a really important thing to make sure that the other person is comfortable. Yeah. As like real, just as a update for people that are listening to this and think this is crazy, I am, oh fuck, I sometimes feel like I'm giving unintentional predator strategies. I don't think I've ever had a girl that like, well, there have been times where there's been like a pause on sexual activity for a while until they like become comfortable or until they've had some time or whatever. But I've never like lost an encounter where, like we're about to do something and I'm like, hey, like you seem like a little stiff. Like, are you comfortable, whatever? And they're like, no, I'm done. Like, I'm out of here. I'm running away because you asked. Like, that's never happened in my entire life. And then on the opposite, I think that usually my encounters, people tell me, are like a lot more relaxed because they feel like if they were to ask me to stop at any time, that we would like be chill and I'm not going to hold it against them or be upset or angry or whatever. And that like comfort for people, like especially for women, I don't know if that's misogyny to say that, but especially for women, it seems to like put people at ease a lot because you're always worried when you're the guy if he's going to be like testing your, and this is coming from somebody bisexual who's been with men, okay? Men are always fucking testing your boundaries constantly. Even if you say no, they will ask again and push and push and push. And if you can be a guy that doesn't do that, I think that women like will respond really well to that, just in my opinion.
I completely agree with everything Destiny just said. We've talked about this previously, actually, quite a bit on this channel, of the concept of, well, not just consent, but like, what this means to try to create an open environment to make people comfortable. But like, I like this idea of expanding on the concept of consent and not just hanging on that. Like, I feel like so often, when we're talking about this, our conversations end up being very stilted. People looking like, well, what about this situation? What about this situation? Like we drop in a lot of hypotheticals to see like, well, should I be responsible here or here or here, instead of taking in the general concept, right? And understanding that you want to create an environment where people are comfortable, where they feel that their voice is being heard, right? Like in my encounters, right, my intimate encounters, like I think I've had something similar to what Stephen is talking about here, and that I've tried to make it so that everyone feels comfortable. They know that like I am listening, and that like I'm not like my expectations aren't primary, right? Like I want to know what your expectations are here, and let's work within that, right? And just like going off that general rule, I think has served me well. I hope I'm being clear. Maybe I'm not being clear. I hope I am.
I've been in that situation too. Like the clarifying. Like I was driving from like New York to Florida. I stayed at a friend's house, so I knew from playing games. And we started like hooking up, and I'm like, "Oh, are you okay?" And she's like, "Oh yeah." And just having that affirmative consent all the time and talking to people like, "Hey, if you don't want to, like, it's totally fine. I don't really care. I just need a place to crash, like whatever."
Go ahead, Feline Father. He's been waiting, and then we'll go to Eris.
Yeah, so I actually had a question for Universe East, right? So you had mentioned that like it for you it's like weird, and you feel like it like pulls a passion out of sex, like asking for consent, right?
Well, okay. What I said, I want to clarify. I thought y'all were talking about like establishing some sort of syllabus beforehand, or before every encounter. Like I've not been on many online dates. Most of my encounters with females have been in public, just naturally. So I'm very limited in this capacity. I don't know like a lot of what, because I understand body language. I understand how people are talking. If I get the awkward vibe, I just don't pursue it. Like that's how it works. I don't even pursue it.
So yeah, I'm not trying to like ding you or anything like that, right? Like I'm genuinely curious, right? So like, what have you ever wondered why it's weird to you to like ask for consent and like, but only like focus mostly on like nonverbal cues, right? Like you ever wonder why it wasn't like why it's not normalized for you, like within like whoever you're
normally if you're if you're in a scenario like for me at a bar or something, right? It just kind of throws the mood off. Now, this is all specific scenarios, so I can't generalize this. This isn't generalizing at all. These are my specific scenarios. I have never been in a scenario with a girl that I've met at like a bar, or even just like been talking to, where I've been like beforehand, like, or is this okay to have sex, or however you want to say it. It's more so just the nonverbal cues. Now, those go both ways though. So if I'm flirting with a girl and she's not into it, and I always, anytime that I have sex with a girl, not to be too TMI, but anytime that happens, I never push boundaries. So I'm always willing to do stuff. I mean, but I if they're like, I just stop. I don't ever push it.
Right.
Do you
Feline, can I? Like, so that's my question. Like, why do you think why do you think it's not normalized? Like, why do you think it is weird for you to ask questions?
I think it's fun. I think it's part of the game, though, right? Like we all enjoy.
Sorry. All right, we've got a lot of crosstalk here, and I don't understand who's asking what. All right, so
well, the game is coming at the expense of someone else's like comfort, though. That's the problem.
Yeah, like that's,
well, not only that, but
that's why it's normalized.
Hold on, real quick.
Hold on. I literally don't even understand exactly who's asking what at this point. So we got to work this out. All right. So Brento, you were asking something.
Yeah, I was just gonna say it's like if you consider like that sort of agreements, like you're like, what's weird about asking consent? And I'm going to use a different kind of example, but it's like, if when you're becoming friends with someone, you don't reach the point like, can we be friends now? Are we friends now? Like, can we sign the friend contract? Like, when you're establishing a relationship with someone, like, there's not like some inherent moment where you ask their permission. And sex is sort of a relationship between people. And like, who you're going to be with is not like some moment. It asks someone to take like a step that is.
You never get confirmation
you're almost
that you're
asking
in
them.
A romantic relationship with somebody?
Yeah,
I mean, in my opinion, it should happen.
A romantic relationship people actually do, though. No, they do that.
I was gonna say, so like Brento, like in particular, right? So I just graduated college, and like I had a lot of experience with people who I met like for the first time, who was like I was hooking up with like that day or that night. Like obviously super chat, like obviously, but in particular, right? during the situations where you have no prior contact with those persons before, it is extremely important that you are communicating as much as possible. And I don't think there's a qualitative parallel between me saying I've seen people on this panel. I'm like, yo, do you fucking play Magic the Gathering too? Let's be bros after this. It is an entirely different relationship than me saying, hey, I would like to enter one of your orifices at some point, in this night.
Problem, though.
Yeah, and so
you don't know, sure. You don't know.
It's
it's a specific scenario for each person, right? So there might be certain scenarios where it's better, and it's not like I've never been like, is this okay? But what I'm saying is, on average, for me specifically, I don't have it. It would put a damper on the situation. It would make it weird, in my experience.
That's what I'm trying to
Universe. So I highly suspect you've actually engaged in this kind of enthusiastic consent behavior, and you just don't realize it because of how people have described it. Because a lot of this stuff can be done just through sexting and flirting, right? Where you're just saying what do you like and playing question games and stuff that. You can basically get
I'm going to say specifically for me, I don't sext. I don't even know how. I'm bad at that.
Never sexted before.
I've
tried it. Hold on, I got it back at the university. I don't think I've ever asked for consent in the way that you guys are explaining.
Exactly.
What?
I hold on. I went through my mandatory phase in my 20s. I don't think I ever asked for consent even once. Hooking up with some girls.
Okay, hold on 1 second. What are you trying to say here, Doopy? Are you saying that he has the wrong idea as to what we're asking? I want to be sure.
No, I just don't. I'm trying to understand what they're saying we should do, because universities, a lot of these situations, I'm at a club, I'm at a bar, we're talking, flirting happens.
The girl has consented by going to that bar.
Not by going to the bar. Not by going to the bar.
Okay. One of the big problems with this kind of stuff is that it is completely possible. I don't remember who said it, but it is totally possible that you could actually negotiate this type of consent without ever actually asking for it. So it doesn't have to be sexting. It could be in the form of a conversation or the way that you guys interact with each other. The problem is just that people say they do and some people don't. I don't know how else to phrase that, but it is entirely possible that you could pick up on a girl's body language and stop doing something when she's not comfortable. And then it's also possible that people say they do that, but they just go full steam ahead because they don't really realize it. So on its face, it's weird. Because I don't know anybody personally here. I could never say for universe, it is totally possible that you could be with a girl and if she's uncomfortable, oh yeah, let's chill and stop, whatever. But then it's also possible that people will say that, oh yeah, I always stop when they're uncomfortable, but they actually don't. They're not aware of it at all. That's just the worry about not. That's why people prefer the verbal, but I mean, it doesn't have to happen. It's just it makes things a lot easier to understand.
Right.
Okay.
If I'm thinking about everybody in the world, I would hope that everybody would ask for consent. If I wanted something to be normalized, I would want consent to be normalized. But me personally, I've never asked for consent. I normally send signals. They send signals back, and then I move forward. I trust myself, but I don't trust everybody else in the world. So I do think consent is probably the best thing to normalize going forward.
So I want to let in Kino, who's been trying to get in.
Hey, Jesus, you guys are missing out on a massive toxic male trait, and that is Destiny just went into it. Thank you. That you guys aren't the gods of body language. You don't always understand that we're communicating that we're uncomfortable or we're not actually consenting or we're hesitant about it. So you guys have this weird way of coercing us to do the thing that you want us to do. But we really don't want to do it.
Hold on, please let it finish. Go ahead.
And I don't think that most men realize that they're doing it.
100%.
And to sit here and say that you've never asked for consent, you don't have any of the burden of fuck, I'm so sorry. It's so late. You need to have the burden of somebody else's words on your actions before you do the thing that you want to do. You need consent, you need to ask, you need to make sure that the intent behind the body language that you're reading into is true. So if you have never asked for consent, I think that's fucked up.
I mean, look, I don't disagree with you, but just hold on, just real quick. I every girl that I've talked to about these things with, though, say the same thing, that like they feel as though it kind of messes things up if somebody actually asks for consent. And I understand that's not your opinion. I understand that that's not
I am
all
a girl
girls'
and I'm
opinion.
talking to you. It's not true.
What's not true? That the girls that I asked didn't say that? So how is that not true?
The thing is, you asking that is kind of asking for consent in the first place.
I have a question
Yeah,
for
so
the women.
you're right, but I ask afterwards though. Like that's the thing. It just seems as though, and I'll look for a poll real quick, but I would think that that's probably normal with
there's like
people.
And to Tom's point, Silly Serious in chat, another of the big member of our community, feels differently from what you're saying, Kena. We've had, and one day I would really like to work out with Joe exactly what her feelings of consent are, because they are quite nuanced, I know. But she's saying like she disagrees with like what you're saying there. So not everyone has the same opinion on this. But Destiny.
I used to listen to Lynn's, I don't remember the fucking name. She talks about sex positivity on YouTube. And I'm pretty sure this even involves me making fun of her on stream about how cringy it is to like do the constant verbal affirmative consent. And I felt the same way for a long time, that it seemed like very unnecessary SJWS, like just very cringy, like would ruin the moment. I have had a lot of experiences doing that, and I have never, ever, ever had a negative reaction to that ever, and it's almost always been the exact opposite. That's one thing that was surprising to me. On a second thing, and this is gonna sound, I don't know how if there's gonna be a lot of people that don't do this. In my opinion, I want to feel like I am decent at sex and I can read body pretty well. If I'm with a new partner, I cannot tell the difference between like a pain or a pleasure sound. I'm sorry, but I don't believe like that. Like if a girl is laying there and you're fingering her and she's like, it's like or like because like and you know like and this is actually something where, and again I think it can sound kind of cringy, but like I have verbally checked on a girl before where after like a minute of fingering her, and because I can't quite tell, and she's telling me like, oh actually I've been like pretty uncomfortable for the past like 2 minutes, and I'm like, oh, I had no fucking idea. And I like to think I'm like relatively into, so I think it's a little bit kind of iffy sometimes. You just go by body language, because it can be really hard to tell if it's a new person. Like if it's somebody that I have a long-term relationship with, I know if it's hurting or not, I can tell. With a new partner, dude, there are some girls where you're fucking them, it sounds like they're absolutely in fucking agony. And it's just, it's hard to tell sometimes. Like,
yes, I've had this exact same experience. I'll just say that I had this exact same experience, literally exact same experience when I was with this woman. And I thought things were going well. I swear I thought it sounded like she was enjoying herself. And you know what? But here's the thing. I literally checked in with her. I literally checked in because I wasn't sure. I said, hey, like, is everything going okay? And she said, yeah, everything's fine, right? And then after, she tells me it hurt.
You got the confirmation, though.
Yeah,
that's
but
so
it's an inverse scale, right? So I've been on the inverse spectrum of this, in the sense that I am too careful and I want to go off the body cues. And then they're like, yeah, I've been waiting all this time. I've had that like 2 or 3 different times, and it just like, it's too awkward for me just to be like, hey, I don't know what it is. Everyone has their different thoughts on it. I find this very interesting, though.
Oh, Keno, hold on one second, please. Keno, you were saying something previously. I want to make sure you get in, because you and Eris are the only ladies here.
I just think that there is a confirmation bias that goes with physical interaction between a man and a woman, and a men who assume that they know how we feel, and you don't unless you ask. Not only that, but if you don't have if you don't put, again, the burden on somebody's words, you could misstep and you could end up doing something that traumatizes them.
But that's a problem here. But like, I not only went over like body language but also got confirm. But okay, you know what? Maybe let's not focus on my point, because I don't think. Yeah. But like, that's fine. It's fine. Let's just, yeah.
Have you ever been in a scenario where you've met a person in just a random scenario, and you thought they were attractive, and you might want to go home with them, so you give them nonverbal cues? Because I'm asking the women here. You don't walk up and like say, hey, I want to bang, or however you want to say it. You like walk up and flirt a little bit, you know, you say, oh, I like your shirt, or I like that. And then at the end, you know, if y'all decide to go home, then there's some sort of confirmation. Hey, you want to come home? You want to come back to my place? You want to do whatever? And there's even at that point, at least in my
Literally
experience,
never, because I don't want to be murdered. No.
And
well, okay.
but universe in
Like, I'm
particular,
sorry, we
right?
have very different experiences.
Wait, sorry. So specifically for universes, like thing, like, oh, I met someone at a party. Like I said, like I have like a ton of like specific fucking experience with this. Yes, like there are multiple levels where you're like, oh, like, are you okay with this? Are you okay with talking with me? Are you okay with like, you know, potentially having physical contact with me? Like when you ask them to go home, you've already established like multiple different things. It's different, but like beyond just saying like, oh, hey, we've like decided to jump back to like my bed and like teleport there and bang. Like you've had to do so many different like say checks for consent and having them like available to come home with you that you've already like established like that particular thing. Like it's not like say like it like a 1 to 100 thing. It's like all these like say the informed consent, especially for like first time interactions. You have to get like the yeses for like different things. If you don't do that, then yes, you're setting yourself up and them up for extremely uncomfortable situations. And it's like,
sorry, go. No, you finish. No, finish. You finish. Finish your point, Hans.
Okay. And so like and so in particular in those like again, if we're talking about specifically like the first round interactions, like so again, like obviously like Destiny said this before, but like yes, if you've known someone for a long time, obviously you know their tells and you know like the different stuff where it's like whether they're comfortable or uncomfortable. But again, like when you meet someone for the first time, it's extremely imperative that you like take say I would say personal responsibility in regards to how you interact with that person and what you say like you're okay with, what you ask them to do, what you ask them not to do. And if you don't do that, then yes, you're setting yourself for horrible things and you're setting them up for horrible experiences as well. So you have to make that. And again, like that might make things like certain like potentially cringy if you think they're cringy. Like, but again, like I feel like most people who've like had this sort of experience, no person has ever been turned off by like someone asking for their consent to do something. That is like the most like odd and true.
I think it's how you go about it. In my experience, I just have different ways of confirming that. So instead of just straight up being, "Are you ready to have sex?" If there somebody made, I don't know who here's made the point of like I said something about bars and girls, and somebody said that well, it's like inferred basically that any girl at a bar is trying to go home with somebody. That's not the case at all. So. If somebody goes home with you and like they're especially, again, these are all specific scenarios, right? So like I can't generalize this and be like, this is how I work for every scenario. But yeah, there's checks. And so like the initial thing, like you were saying, steps, it's you interact with that person, you flirt, you find out if they're even vibing with you. Then you vibe throughout the night, right? And then you ask if they want to go home. By that point, then you still have to make sure when they get there, if they're not just wanting to chill, have another couple of drinks, hang out on the couch and pass out because they don't want to go back home. So you have to do, but I haven't ever just gone straight up and been like, so are we going to do this or what? Like it's always been more of an inferred flirty conversation, or they'll be like, oh, can I sleep in your bed? It's all like that for me. So
Universe, how old are you?
I don't
just like a quick question. This is like a
hold on, real quick.
How 28? You said? Did you say you were 28? Was that right? 29. Okay, sick. So this seems like, and maybe I could be like misreading here. I know that like Doobie's older. It sounds like you're older. I know Stephen, you're about that age, right? That's correct?
32. 32.
Yep. Okay, sick. It seems like, and Stephen mentioned this was something they used to do. It seems like this is very much like an older thing, right? Like I'm like 30 myself, right?
I'm 32.
And this is something. Yeah, 32, right? It seems like the idea of talking about consent in this way has been something that's like newer. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, right? It seems like a lot of the older people are sort of just going on like either like what their parents taught them or how media portrays these sorts of relationships, which isn't great. Frankly, right? Like if you where you learn from, it's like the bros aren't going to tell you like, yeah, just make sure you ask for consent in every way. In fact, this was actively mocked on TV consistently, right? Like one of these things I remember seeing like back in the day, a while back, was during like the Chappelle show. They had like a whole skit where he'd like sit down and like sign like a sex form and like here make like tick this, sign this, and that was like a whole bit, right? It seems like for older people who didn't like, I know 30 is like not really older, but like this idea of talking about consent, it's a healthy change that we've made, which is good, but that we need to somehow communicate this to people. And the way that we're like communicating this to young people seems to be working pretty well, right? It seems to be like older people just need to sort of catch up to where we're at. Because I'm like, yeah.
Go ahead, Eris. Eris, go ahead.
There are ways that you can do it that are sexy, right? That are not like just writing a form and saying, do you consent to sex, right? Have you ever told a girl, like the sexiest thing a guy can say, okay, is I want you, right? Because that's like inevitably kind of getting consent because she's, I mean, unless you ignore what she responds with. But But like just saying something like that, right? There are just so many ways that I have seen in movies or that kind of thing, especially like in the last 5 years, where it's still sexy, can still feel like passionate and intense. I think you guys are just imagining it's like this, like, SJW like situation. It's like, okay, well, I'm just concerned that you need to consent to this act and to this act. It's just, it doesn't need to be like that.
Okay, so we'll go to
Can I backtrack on one thing?
We'll go to Kino and then Kingfish, who's been waiting very patiently, and then Feline Father. After that, we'll check in with Dr. K if she wants to say anything.
I apologize. I just got back. I just wanted to back up on the point that oh my God, I'm so sorry. Eris, did you say she said that saying something like "I want you" is a way to get consent, and I disagree with that specifically because again, it's putting the man's opinion and the man's want on the woman, and she might respond in a way that she thinks is most pleasing to him. And I think that the theme of tonight and my breakdown, I'm so sorry, is that we need to make sure that in a male space with and sexual spaces that we are asking women what their experiences are rather than putting male opinion on them.
Okay.
I would disagree entirely with that. Saying "I want you" it allows for an opening. I want you. I don't want you. Okay, bye.
Okay.
I want you. I want you. All right, cool. Like it's not a "I want you, be mine now." Man grab, man take. It's
that's your experience. That's not often
exactly. And I wanted to say,
not exactly.
I'm completely out of my element in this discussion because I again have only had my specific scenarios, so I don't know about this. All of this stuff. So
I finished my earlier.
Sure, please.
Okay, so I don't mean to talk over people, but and this goes towards what I was saying because in a way, what you're saying, Kino, is correct, right? And it just demonstrates like we probably come from like different subcultures or different cultures or who knows. That a lot of this is just so variant on where you are. Like if you're traveling, like you're gonna get affirmative consent is going to be like very different in, I don't know, like Palestine than in Wyoming. So we're not exactly the best. We're not like these rational beings that we think we are, that we're going to be examining. Like I agreed with what Destiny said earlier. The problem is that the average person in that moment, and even beforehand, even when you're like, thinking about the girl, and you want to have sex with them eventually, like you're just not going to be that rational. So like it's important to just be skeptical and always be thinking like, have I set myself up to be in a problematic situation?
Yeah. Okay.
Not from the victim's perspective. Just want to clarify that.
Sure. We'll check in with Steven first, and we'll go to Kingfish.
Something also, if it feels frustrating because it feels like men get shit on a lot for this, I would saddle a lot of the blame on this type of stuff too on women as well. It is very toxic that men try to like take. It is equally or almost as toxic that women expect men to always make the first move on this. When women are constantly expecting men to always be the one to have to ask and make the first move, it's almost always going to be the case that men are going to overstep their boundaries. That's something that we could, obviously I'm not blaming either party, but like, well, we're kind of blaming both parties, but like, I think there's a lot of responsibility to go around and that a lot of our dating culture can like lend itself to some kind of like toxic interactions. And I think that both parties can probably do things to improve those types of sexual encounters.
So what you just touched on, Steven, holy crap. I'm not sure if I would have put it in exactly those words, but it's something I've talked about many times before as to how difficult it is for men to understand how to navigate the dating space, if they're always expected to make the first move, and if there isn't proper communication back and forth, right, as to like what the expectations are, right? Like the idea that like I have to go in for the kiss, like I'm supposed to go in for the kiss and not ask, right? There's a thing in popular culture, right? I think maybe we're breaking this down now, but like it's a very confusing space for a young man to come into, and I think we need to have more conversations on exactly this, right? And like, hey, you have desire, I have desire, let's make it clear that we want each other, and that what's happening here is accepted. I don't know. I hope that was clear at all.
I just want to post a question real quick, if
Kingfish has been waiting for a long time.
Okay.
Go ahead. I like
I'm so
hearing her. Go
sorry.
ahead.
I just want to ask if you and Destiny believe that men have a responsibility for creating environments wherein women feel safe to offer our opinions. And I mean offer our opinions, not be asked about our opinions.
Yeah, well, obviously.
Yeah.
I just think it's really important to note that, like, not to get too political, but like when we talk about feminism, we talk about patriarchy. Patriarchy is a system that if we believe it's oppressive to men and women. So I think it's really important that we all understand that there are ways that we can come together to kind of like improve scenarios, and that when we look at how men have a very toxic relationship to sex, in my opinion, but I think that women can as well. And I think it's important to recognize that we all like contribute to a very negative environment relating to this, and that we can all take steps to improve it. Not to say that this excuses any bad actor's particular actions, or not to say that like if you've been the victim of a negative encounter, it was necessarily your fault. I just think it's good to see that we can all take positive steps to be more proactive, to make these encounters better for everybody. Yeah.
But also sensitive to it as well.
Okay, go ahead. No. Kingfish has been waiting quite patiently.
So I tuned into the stream, and all I hear is opinions from a bunch of dirty breeders. Now, as a non-sex haver myself, I had to come in and throw my hat in the ring. So, from a non-sex haver's perspective, right? I've heard quite a few things listening here that I disagree with. One thing that really stuck to my brain is the idea of, like, someone compared this to like a friendship contract, right? Like, we have to sign a contract to say we're friends, which is ridiculous, right? To compare something like just a casual friendship or acquaintances to, a sexual encounter or like a relationship, right? Because this kind of sexual encounter can have a lot more impact on someone's life if it goes poorly than just, like acquaintances, like one of them doesn't really like the other one. That's a lot different. But Steven did bring up the other thing that I wanted to bring up, though, which is you're putting a lot of pressure on these men who especially may be socially awkward too to do this. That doesn't absolve them, of course, right? They're still guilty of doing it. But I think one way we could start to help this is to deconstruct the men are the or like the getters, right? And the women are the bounty, I guess,
Okay, feline father.
Yeah, so two things with me, right? So the reason that like it's really important for me, like ask consent before I do the deed, right? Like are you comfortable? Like, can we do this, right? It's like a twofold thing. So one, like we need to realize that like in society at large, right? Like there's this idea, it's like real toxic idea that like women are there to get men, like have men are meant to have sex with women, right? And like generally speaking, like female enjoyment is never like one of the topics of conversation, right? So it's like the idea that you need to realize that that's like a kind of like a cultural idea, and you need to like kind of like step back a little bit and be like, am I checking my own bias? Am I checking my own blind spots, making sure I'm not being part of the problem, right? And the second thing is when you ask for consent, right, early on, right, it sets a precedence with that person that you like are open to like consent and you're open to have these conversations, right? And it makes it like it breaks down that power dynamic like throughout like the whole situation. So it makes it easier for like you to ask them like, hey, like, does this pleasurable? Does it hurt you? And they're more willing to say like, well, yeah, I kind of do like that, or I don't like that, And so it's all about like breaking down like the communication barriers to make it a good experience for everybody,
Go ahead. Go ahead, Doobie, then we'll go to Dr. K.
Yeah, I actually just wanted to ask Keno a question, because just kind of like harp on what Destiny and Prime said. You said that if a man were to say, I want you to a woman, she might respond in a way that she thinks would make the man happy. But if I'm the man in that situation and I'm saying something like that and she responds in a positive way, and then we leave the bar or whatever, we go back to the hotel and she's totally into it, how am I supposed to know that she's only doing this to please me, and later on she might not actually be into it, or a couple days later she might feel like I took advantage of her or whatever the fuck. I think there is some kind of responsibility there.
Did you ask?
Well, I think that again, yeah,
They absolutely do, but that's not what we're talking about.
No, but you don't always ask directly like that. I mean, it could be something as simple as, "Hey, I want you. Want to go back to my hotel?" or something like that. Or she says,
that was asking for consent.
Like, "Hey, what are you doing? What are you doing?
That's very direct.
What are you doing after when you leave here? Hey, I got a hotel down the street. You want to come?" Like some shit like that, right?
You want to come? That is asking.
Okay,
then clarify.
But you said but you just said that she might answer in a way that she thinks would please a man. Right.
So if she's the difference between I want you, which is you putting your feelings on me and
Not
asking
really.
how I feel about something?
There's a difference between
Why can't you just respond with, "Hey, no, thank you"?
Please stop interrupt. Don't interrupt, please. Were you saying Doobie and Kino?
Yeah. So why couldn't she just say no, thank you? Like I don't. It just seems strange to put all the responsibility on the man in that situation.
You're conjuring a fantasy scenario, dude.
Well, I think,
I
can we
don't
phrase
think
this
so.
a little bit differently, Kino? Would you feel the same if a woman said to the man, "I want you"? Would you feel as though she's putting
No, because
something?
his feelings matter. The feelings of the other person within any relationship matters more than how I feel.
What?
Wait, I don't understand. Could you say that again?
Sorry, it's really late. Not that the feelings matter more, but they matter equally. And when you are telling somebody how you feel and not recognizing that you could be rather putting the onus of how you feel on them to respond positively. So I think
She's saying it's the same for both the man and the woman.
No, but
Yes,
in that
of course
equation, I'm responsible for my feelings, right? So I want to have sex with this person. If she doesn't want to have sex with me, she can just say no. Just no, thank you. Like I'm not really responsible for what she's feeling in that equation, really.
You're
If
right.
she's
No,
uncomfortable.
but
She can
It
open
is
her
your
mouth and tell
job to
me.
read the signs, dude.
It's not your job to manage her emotions. You are correct. If she does answer in a way that is dishonest, whether or not it is purposeful or not, yes, you are not responsible for managing her emotions. However, men need to recognize that we have been in an environment where we don't feel like we can be honest to men sometimes, or that there is a power dynamic, or we have to say yes. And I think that failing to ask how a woman feels does not create a healthier environment where we feel like our opinions do matter.
Yeah.
Okay. Dr. K.
I mean, yeah, no, like Kino basically echoed my main point here is just like communication will vary from couple to couple based on, cultural signifiers, what gender stuff, so on and so forth, right? And like like for any couple, like whenever a situation like, Mr. Doobies arises, like, what you got to do is you just got to chill, like take a step back and just like talk it out. Like it's not like, we're not on a time limit, it's not like we're gonna, get blown up if we don't answer in time. Like you just take a deep breath, move back a few steps and communicate with them. And like if you want this kind of stuff not really fixed, but if you want to see this kind of improvement in these sorts of communications in the long term, I think that there needs to begin to be sort of a cultivation of this sort of communication and a sort of impetus put on teaching emotional intelligence, more both in media, in familial situations, and in educational environments. And especially if you're dating someone who's like in a vulnerable population, like, or a group outside of your own where there isn't sort of this set up cultural communication or sort of environment pre sort of existing. Like, yeah, it's important to communicate, like doubly so if you're dating someone who you wouldn't normally be dating.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I just think
go to be finished. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just think some of the language used is like infantilizing to these women.
What, for me?
Not you. I think what Kino said earlier, right, that they might respond in a way that in such a way that they think would make me happy, right? As a man in that equation, and that I need to be aware of that. But I mean that could easily go the other way, right? There's no reason a man couldn't feel pressured into having sex with a woman that he wasn't really all that attracted to, just because he's one of his friends to find out that he didn't have sex with her later, whatever the fuck, right? Like I don't know. It just seems like to me, it just comes off as like infantilizing.
Okay. Go ahead, Kingfish. And then I want to check in on Sharpie if he wants to say anything.
So what I was gonna ask again as the non-sex havers, what is the best way to like make sure that because obviously, right, whenever you are in a relationship, especially like a male-female relationship, there is usually at least, pressure on the woman to say yes to like these kind of sexual encounters. What is the best way to make sure that, like, let's say I was asking for this, right? What would be the best way to make sure that I wouldn't be like pressuring someone, or that I wouldn't make like, what would be the best way for me to approach and make sure that when I'm saying this, that they have a genuine response and not just like, you know, they feel pressured to do that? How would I go about that?
So, in specifically a response to that, right? So, I'm probably one of the youngest people on this panel. I'm 23, like, you know, full Zoomer generation. It feels like this sort of conversation has somewhat already like been had and been like, say, like one in the case of my generation in terms of like, say, like having like very like, say, public informed consent. So what I would ask, particularly like to like the ladies on this panel, and then Steven, in terms of like how we deal with, say, like the potential disparities like in the sexual marketplace, like how like men and women interact with each other, is how do we, say, change the metric of how we interact, whether on an interpersonal level, if there's like anything potentially, say, like legislatively we're supposed to do, like to provide a more like safe environment for like women to be more forward or men to be more vulnerable. What would we recommend for this specific thing, especially for the older generations of like all you fucking boomers who are 30 years old, to change the understanding of people who have not yet, say, grown up inside the environment, like, say, people like I have. So
I mean, Kino, do you want to take it or me?
Go ahead. You haven't talked enough tonight.
Pop off, Dr. K.
Well, I just got here, right? So specifically, you're asking how do we like sort of prevent this sort of breakdown in communication from happening at a sort of meta societal level kind of thing?
Yeah, because I feel like there's plenty of people that are like, they're like, you know, the quote unquote good people who don't like fuck up like in this horrible way, who like say like, oh, like I understand this.
Yeah.
But then they're like, there's people that maybe like, say, like a decade older who are still quote unquote good people, but they don't understand like exactly how to navigate the situation. So how do we change the society for them to like to bring them into like, the overall loop?
I mean, obviously, like this kind of stuff. You know, I have autism. I had to learn this kind of shit too, right? I had to learn most of my emotional intelligence, right? And it's like you start at home, right? Like parents sort of should teach their children about these ideas of like consent and boundary setting and stuff like that. If it's not done there, you know, I think that that's also something that should follow in like sex ed in schools kind of thing, right? And then you know, at a larger scale, you know, there is obviously sort of this overarching culture of you know, let's be real, toxic masculinity, and like what you got to do is you simply got to call it out where you see it, and maybe in time there it needs to be a underlying sort of cultural shift away from sort of male centric behaviors that we've sort of either purposefully or stumbled into as a social society or whatever, you know.
So let's go to Kino and then Steven.
Okay. This isn't a overall solution. It's just an observation that I have. Because I don't have the answer for the next generations, nor do I have the answer specifically to make sure that women and men feel safe in communicating their consent. However, I think that recognizing the environments that do perpetuate the anxieties of not being able to communicate clearly, effectively, and honestly, I fucking forgot what I was saying. I'm sorry. Dude, it's 2 a.m. here.
Yeah,
oh my God.
Yeah, it happens.
I apologize.
I feel that.
Yeah, so you need to recognize that those environments are there, and most importantly, I think what can heal a lot of us is asking, just asking, and making sure that people understand passively understand that their opinions and what they want are valued without you and your opinion clustering on top of it somehow. That's it.
Can I just say one response?
Okay, I'll give you that response. We'll go to Steven afterwards. Go ahead.
Sure. I just to go off of that as well. Like, I just think you can call me sex negative. People have called me that for making this comment, but I just think you should talk to people a lot more and get to know them before you have sex with them. Like, even if you're gonna have casual sex, like just talking more, texting more, it just like leads to on average like a better situation. Where just those conversations are going to be facilitated in like a much more natural way.
So no one night stands.
No, that's not what anyone's saying.
No more sex.
Look,
no
dude,
more sex.
There's two.
Sorry. One second.
There's been a good amount of generalization.
Hold on. Stop. I'm checking with Steven, and then we'll get back to you all. Don't worry. It's Universe. we will definitely get back to you. But Steven, go ahead.
That's all good.
My boy Benelli.
Yeah. Sorry. So just like real quick, when the easiest thing. So somebody asked you like, what is the goal or what are we supposed to do, whatever. I think the goal is just that like when you ask somebody a question, you want them to feel like there's no consequence for them saying no. As long as you feel like you've taken care of that, then it's over. So for somebody earlier, somebody was giving the example of like, I want you or blah, blah, blah. Like if you're saying something like that in the club, you're probably fine. If they're like in a public area and they feel like they can turn you down and they're not going to get killed for it or something's going to happen, then you're probably okay. Now, if you're like at home or with somebody, like something that's like very weird to think of for men is like, even for me, who I would consider myself to be like relatively weak compared to the average man, I feel like I could kill most of the women that I go out with. And so when I'm out with a woman, it's not something that I ever have to think about, right? I am never with like a woman and I'm like, man, this motherfucker would kill me if she goes crazy. But when I'm with guys, it's a different thought process, right? Like I have never in my life worried about like bringing a woman back to my fucking apartment. I don't give a fuck. But I would never bring a guy back to my current apartment because if a girl gets mad at me, she's gonna do some crazy shit and slash my tires. If a guy gets mad at me, he's gonna fucking kill me. Okay, like that's like kind of like the difference in terms of what you think. And I know like as men, we don't really think about it, especially in heterosexual relationships with your men. But yeah, like the goal of like any type of like consent and blah blah blah. You can make a comment, not comment, but the goal is at the end of the day, you want to feel like the other person feels like they can say no without consequence. And honestly, the only way to get there is to have already had positive sexual interactions with them. But then the next closest step is to just make sure that you're asking them questions in a way where they feel like they can say no without pressure to say yes, where they have an out and they don't feel like they might get punished for saying no or whatever otherwise.
Sharpie, you've been waiting. So we'll go to Sharpie, and then we'll go back to Universe East. Oh, and then, sorry, hold on. We'll go to Sharpie, then we'll go to Socrates, then we'll go back to Universe East. Go ahead.
Yeah, so number one, Steven, that seems like a weird take for someone that's spending so much time with bows. But number two, like, I don't understand what you said earlier when you were saying that you think that women are just as toxic in perpetuating this relationship where men have to be the first to make the move. Like, just as toxic seemed, or equivalently toxic seems a little bit overbearing there.
It's potentially reductive, but the idea that like say men suffer under the patriarchy just as much as women, but in different ways, is like a relatively like reasonable take that many people have once you like say isolate the issues of like say the patriarchy versus like for men versus women, and like that's totally a fine thing. But again, like we deal with like whataboutism like super often where it's like, oh hey, we're gonna have like a 20-minute talk about men's issues, and then someone will be like, oh, what about women? It's like, yes, we'll talk about women, but we're specifically talking about men's issues. So, like you saying like, oh, like someone said like there's issues in the patriarchy, but like how like women respond or in like the sexual marketplace. It is entirely differential than saying like, oh, like yes, there are issues on like say for men and for women. So I don't know why that like aside from like you just like attacking somebody, it feels really weird.
All right. I mean, okay. Yeah, but didn't we just bring up the fact that like women have to worry about getting killed?
Okay.
Too,
so I've had knives pulled on me and guns.
Hold on.
I gotta talk about this.
We will. We'll go right. We'll go to you in a second. But Socrates first.
Okay, so I guess I don't know why I'm speaking for Destiny here, but just to Sharpie, I don't think he said that like women are equally toxic to men, or this is like the same thing. But I did actually have like some problem with that take, which is funny because this is like literally what the Scrub King said in that infamous debate, whatever, that it's like. It would be great, like it's something that would probably help if women were to approach men more often, that could probably have long-term positive consequences. But of course, that's not something that is easy for women to do right now because of the behavior of men. Just to give an anecdote, like I was in a fucking club and ended up like making out with this guy. And then like the whole fucking rest of the night, just like wouldn't leave me alone, like at all. And this is like, gave me like a little bit of insight into what presumably a lot of women deal with like very, very often, that it's like any forward gesture, there's no way to take back that consent in the eyes of that man. And that was my point.
That's true.
Okay,
that's true. Yeah.
Okay, well, making out with somebody in my mind is kind of pushing limits on a forward position on something. I mean, if you're talking to somebody, that's kind of one of the things I wanted to say. But one of the things I definitely want to point out is in chat and in here is a lot of generalization going around. A lot of things that are like, oh, guys be like this and girls be like that. It's not the case. Now, I'm going to be honest. If I would talk to more women like Kino, I probably would have less emotional and physical scars, right? But there's a lot of women are different and men are different. I feel like I'm very intuitive, and I I'm very respectful of everybody that I come into contact with. So in my personal experiences are going to be way different from anybody else's, hopefully. But, you know, I mean, like in these scenarios where we're generalizing like how women would act and how men would act, how it's like, you know, not all women are at the club to fuck. A lot of people are at the club to dance and to have a good time. Like their intention is not, and I've been turned down plenty of times putting my moves on. So also saying that women in general feel like they can't say anything back, that's absolutely not the case. In fact, a lot of females, when they go out, they have a group. So they have that kind of back support. Men do the same thing too. You know, you got your boys and you got your girls. So the saying that like men are going to act like this and women are going to act like this in all these scenarios is not the case. So like Kino might not go out and find a guy and just hook up with him, and that's respectable, honestly. But there's a lot of women that do that, and there's a lot of women that have no problem with saying no to a guy, you know. So I think it all comes down to your own look. I'm never gonna start like, I'm just gonna let you know, like nothing in this conversation is gonna be able to change how I interact with women, because it's just how I you know. But I'm not predatory in my mind. So maybe from the outside looking in, it might be different. But in all, I'm listening to how y'all describe predatory instincts or predatory advances.
Sorry, wouldn't you want to examine that now? Like, I am not saying you're I don't know you, and I'm not putting any judgment on you. Okay, just make that very clear. But like, wouldn't you want to examine if you might be right? So like, I've gone through my whole journey to like rethink my behavior with women in the past, right? And I think I've engaged in bad behavior. In fact, no, I don't want to say I think. I know I have. I've engaged in bad behavior in the past, right? But like, I can only have arrived at that conclusion. It's because I've taken the time to try to reconcile all that with all the new information that I've been getting from listening to women, right? Listening to women like Kino, listening to other great women that I've come into my life, either through streaming or from before, right? Let me know, talk about their experiences, then it clues me in, because unfortunately we don't have an education on all this, right? So like, it's helped clue me in that, hey, maybe what I did was kind of fucked up and I should change, right? So if you're saying that like in this conversation nothing's going to change your mind, right? Like that's pretty messed up, regardless of whatever you're doing, right? Like I think we should be striving to be better, right?
I'm just saying, what I was saying is that, and also in my experience, I've never had like somebody after the fact be like, oh, I didn't want to do that or anything. So this is all coming from my own personal experience.
But maybe she didn't feel comfortable saying that. Maybe she's
I mean, we're throwing out a lot of if, ands, ors, but it's not the case. So I'm going off of my own personal experience.
I understand that.
Maybe, like I said, and this is why I respect Kino's opinion
my point
entirely.
Is your personal experience is limited, right? And so is mine. As a man, my personal experience is limited, and what women will tell to me, saying to me in my face, like I can make a woman uncomfortable, right? And then she can just hold that for the rest of her life and never tell me, right? Because she thinks, well, because maybe if I say something to him, he'll get violent. That's a thing that happens, right? So that's why I'm saying, like, again, I'm not drawing conclusions about you or any of your past, right? But I'm saying is that, like, at the very least, right, from this conversation, we should be trying to take away is something. It is like to re-examine it all.
And like,
I'm not saying that I'm not learning about how women think about this, but I'm saying that.
So like in particular universe, like so like again, so like you're like a decade older than me. So when like I don't like, obviously, like as everyone said, like I'm not like computing your personal history. You don't seem like a bad guy. I would say in particular that I feel like I would hope that this conversation would make you at least like reconsider or potentially reconsider how you potentially interact with people or potentially ask for consent inside of your like framework of how you interact with people. Again, this isn't saying that you're like a bad person. Obviously, like if you didn't think this was an issue, like and you've been interacting, like say as like ethically as you possibly can, like outside of this, that is totally like, you know, fine. But like again, inside the bounds of this conversation, it feels kind of strange that you would say like, oh, like I'm not going to change how I'm interacting after like hearing like about the potential benefits of say like interacting, say like specifically asking like, you know, for consent among other things. And again, like I've like it feels like having like that particular like attitude, it makes people feel unsafe. And again, I like literally I've thrown people out of parties who have like made people uncomfortable, and it feels like odd that like you wouldn't be say like more like potentially like say like reciprocal to the idea, because then like you're not a bad guy, obviously, and I'm not like attacking you in any way. Like, seem like a cool guy. We're gonna play Magic the Gathering later, but like in particular, it's like what about say what we've said to you has not convinced you about like say the potential benefits of say like asking for consent as to
okay, that's not what I was saying at all. I understand where everybody's coming from on this. What I'm saying is that I'm just too ingrained in where the way I do things. I've been interacting. Now, look, I'm not saying that, and I also feel like the way I interact with women also makes them feel very comfortable. That's my goal. I don't like to have an awkward time. I don't know about anybody else. If I'm having sex, I want it to be fucking awesome every time, as good as it possibly can, and that comes with comfortability. Sex is way better if you're comfortable with the person as much as possible. So what I'm saying is that I just don't feel like the way I interact. I'm not saying that there's no merit in asking for consent. I'm not saying that, oh, anybody that does that is a simp, cucking, whatever the fuck. That's not the case.
Sure.
I'm saying that the way I interact in those scenarios, I don't feel, in my opinion, in my experience and from feedback, I don't feel like I ever make people feel uncomfortable in that way. But I also, again, I understand.
Okay, sure. I think we get it. So I just want to move this. Hold on. Stop, please. I want to move this along. So hold on. Don't worry. I want to go Steven. Then I'm going to go to Eris, who was trying to say something previously. Then I'm going to Kino. Then I'm going to Dr.
I had my
K.
hand up for Eris.
Okay. Oh, you had your hand up. Eris. So all right, Steven, then Eris, then Dr. K.
Fuck. I was gonna respond to what the Sharpie guy said, but I feel like I'm derailing the conversation. Pass back to me later.
Okay. Eris, go ahead.
God damn it, just derailed, Steven. Come on.
Yeah.
It's fine.
Okay, I think so. I'm gonna take a bit of a different take here. Is I think one of the coolest things a guy can do, right? If you don't want to do the whole, or you think it's like too much, right? Like to do the whole contract thing. You can also just like when a guy exudes the kind of like healthy confidence that you feel that there's this kind of confidence that, I mean, the girls in here will know that like you just feel like you could tell him, oh, I didn't orgasm there, or I'm not into this, or like something like that, and you just know it's not going to like destroy his ego and his heart isn't going to break. Because sometimes it's not just about a fear of violence. I mean, that's always there, but like girls are just so socialized to be worried about men's feelings like all the time. And it's like that's why girls fake orgasms, right? So if you really exude that confidence and you really, like as Destiny mentioned, you really give that option, like you set them up to be able to say no. They have an out in which you don't, feel destroyed and feel sad and feel super offended like afterwards. Then that's also like its own way of asking for consent too.
Additive. But on top of that, also recognize that even if you do give us an out, again, we come from environments where when we were honest, it became violent. And I just wanted to add that I think that it's just important to recognize that.
And I think that's generalized.
Okay. Oh, we'll get back to that. Dr. K. Go ahead.
Man, this dude fucking. Man, am I in the Soviet Union? Because I am seeing some red fucking flags, man. That's crazy.
Oh my god.
Yeah. Yeah. Like. Again. I'm a trans woman. I've had plenty of dates, and I've had plenty of guys where he seemed to be acting perfectly reasonable in his own eyes, right? And was like, yeah, I'm doing the absolute correct thing. Meanwhile, I was like, oh, is he going to fucking knife me behind this alleyway? Do I need to fucking run? Like, I generally would say when it comes to this kind of stuff, like that your own senses can often lie because, we're not all mind readers, and you can't always, truly perceive what another person is feeling just from your interactions with them.
Yeah, like I literally when I've been to a guy's like apartment and I've said no to sex and I come home all safe and happy, I look back at that, I'm like, wow, I'm so lucky I didn't get raped. Right?
Mhm.
Like that's just a normal process for lots of women, trans women. Like it's just a thing that like is just ever present on your mind.
Yeah. So if I could also pop in. So Socrates TV, I'm actually glad you mentioned your like experience you had in like the dance club, right? Because I can echo that, right? So very recently kind of came out like bisexual, and like last year and a half I've been experimenting with like anal sex, right, and being like bottom of the situation, right? And
king.
And so like I never experienced, right, what it's like to actually have your agency, like to actually be the one, like it's gonna be weird, but like be the one being penetrated.
Receiving,
right? Right, because when you're the one giving, right, like you're the one giving like the situation, you're the one in control and you're the one giving the force, right? Like when you're receiving, you are very vulnerable in the situation, right? And I've had a situation to where, I had a guy over and, I was trying to express to him like, hey, you need to slow down, like, press the brakes there, Skid Row, right? But like he just was not getting it, and yes, sure, I could have yelled at him like, hey, stop, right? But like it was just something about the situation and being like the one receiving that just like I felt like I couldn't, right? Or I felt like it was just like a situation where I couldn't, right? And following like after that experience I had, like I get it, I had a full picture of the situation. It's like fuck, like when you're the one receiving, you're the one that then have power or control in the situation. It's very, very difficult to say something, especially if it's like a mental block almost, right? And I would also ask, Universe East, right? So, in regards to like, you saying that you're not going to change your mannerisms or change your opinions, right? Like what would need to be presented to you to show you that maybe you should reevaluate the way you approach people?
Well, so are we insinuating that? See, because again, like I said, I don't feel like the way I handle things is. Right. I don't specifically ask, but it's kind of like Eris or.
Have you asked the women though?
What do you mean? Have I asked? What do you mean?
You're like, oh, my approach is 100% perfect. I know exactly how to.
No, I'm not saying it's 100% perfect.
And
I'm
have
just
you ever
saying
actually wait, bro? Hear me out, right? Have you ever actually asked like, hey, girl, am I doing everything all right? Is everything cool with you, baby? Like, have you ever actually done that?
I guess I just have more confidence in myself than that. I don't need.
Okay, how do you vet yourself? Like, how do you?
It's not a confidence problem, dude. It's a fucking boundaries thing.
We're talking about social. We're talking about at this point. I feel like we're talking about social interaction scenarios. Like, yes, I understand that there's boundaries, and I respect those boundaries when they're placed in front of me. But never do I. Do
you ever proactively try to figure out what the boundaries are?
I mean, in my experience, it just kind of comes out naturally. If I try to do something and you're like, I don't continue. Like we're focusing on these, like, again, I'll say this again. Everybody's scenarios and the way they interact with people.
Yeah, there's cultural differences for everyone. Yeah, whatever.
Change the way that I interact. I still will respect everybody's opinion. Right. I understand where y'all are coming from entirely, but I just have no need, and I don't go out and like, I'm sitting here at 4 a.m. talking about this. I'm not out like fucking women and like. So
that's what I'm saying. Yeah, like, all I'm asking you, right? Like, all I'm asking,
would a direct example help?
Generalizing how I can have examples too. So we have different examples. You're a completely different person than I am. So are they. So are they. So are they.
I wasn't trying to like attack you. Or, like I'm not trying to.
No, I don't feel attacked, but I mean, I just want to make sure that y'all are aware that everything that I'm saying is based on me. So I'm not saying I'm going to go out and just put my manhood on somebody.
No. So let me just ask you, right? Like all I was asking you, right, is like for yourself, right? Like how do you self-vet your own mannerisms, right? Because like can you agree that like there are some things that are like unspoken, and because they are unspoken, people step over the line a lot, right? Like
I'm not going to say I have never made a girl uncomfortable. I could give you an example of horrible, cringy.
You're making a girl uncomfortable right now.
It was very, very clear. Like the body language and the uncomfortableness, even the air seemed a little bit.
Let me ask you, like, would you agree that there are situations where a woman can be uncomfortable and not give off those vibes?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, so that's what I'm talking about. Those situations, right? Like, how do you know, right? How like what is your self checking? Like, how do you self check your own way you approach people, right? When you don't have very clear like things.
I do feel like if your mood changes, regardless for whatever reason, whether it's to awkwardness or anger, there is a change. It's involuntary. You're not like, I mean, yes, some people are better at suppressing the way they, but it's again, I consider myself a fairly intuitive person. I work a lot off of instinct. And so like if I'm at a bar with somebody and we're chatting and I'm flirting and it's very clear that I'm flirting, I'm flexing or I'm saying she's pretty or whatever the fuck I'm doing. And then we start like for me, it's more of these interactions for me are more comfortable if they're natural. And for me, in my experiences, I've never, I guess, been with a female that I didn't know kind of to an extent how she was feeling about that scenario, whether it be even outside of sexually. I mean, most people give off signs if they're uncomfortable, right?
Damn,
so
bro, didn't know you're a psychic.
I'm not a psychic. I mean, I feel like you're attacking me now because I'm like not coinciding with your views, and I'm not going to stop like interacting the way I am.
I feel like there's an irony here. I feel like there's an irony here, and that is that women are telling you that the way that you behave is reprehensible.
No. Again, generalization. You are telling me this, but this is not every girl is you. Not every woman is you. So, and again, I already said that if I did not go out and like date crazy women, I wouldn't have a stab wound in my leg, or I wouldn't have, whatever the hell happened.
If you weren't willing to listen to two women in this chat, why do you think we're going to be convinced you're going to listen to any other women in real life if you can't even listen to women in this chat?
The CEO of women.
I'm not saying. I'm saying that I've already said I respect what you're saying, Kino, but you're not every woman on the planet. And there's been women in this chat that have said,
I guess I'm chopped liver.
I'm just saying, I literally just said.
That is not respect. You are dismissing me.
So if I don't say you're right, I should go ahead and do exactly what you're saying.
No.
Then what am I supposed to?
What would be the necessary evidence here then?
How do I convey that I respect what you're saying and like you make points, but I just
Universe,
the way I interact with women, I don't
open to
feel
what they're saying.
Universe,
You're literally
saying that
not
like
even
it's not
open.
that. So you're saying that it's not that it's just Kino's like one person, right? And then there's like multiple women on the panel saying multiple things that are very similar to echo this. What would be sufficient evidence to you, right? If I was to find like polling, like decent polling on this, right? That women feel uncomfortable in these certain situations, or they have felt uncomfortable during like dating adventures, right? That like, would this be sufficient evidence for you? What would be your threshold of evidence that you'd require to like consider changing your mind or consider some behavior change?
So okay, and you can answer that. You're going to answer that in a second. I just want to know. I'm going to go. Here's the order. It's going to be Steven, and then it's going to be Kingfish, and then I'm going to let in our newest person, Joe the Silly Serious. Okay. All right, Steven, Kingfish, and Joe Serious. But go ahead first. You can universities. You can respond to that. Go ahead.
My bad. What did you say?
Kyosan, ask a question.
So what would be the threshold of evidence you'd require to consider that maybe like some past behaviors have done have been toxic, that maybe women feel uncomfortable in these situations? Like you said that like this is just one person. If I was to say find polling on this situation, would this be something you'd think about?
What do you mean? Like if you polled and every single woman in chat voted yes? I mean, I guess.
No. I'm saying there's actual polling on this. Like people ask a lot of different questions. There's a lot of different studies called on these different things, right? Like studies on the level of consent.
What's your burden of proof, essentially?
I think. Look, I
could go to the effort to find these studies if you feel like.
I mean, sure, you could say, but there's never going to be a study that, first of all, accurately depicts what every woman feels like, right?
Do you think you uniquely interact with women?
Like different things, huh?
Do you think you uniquely interact with women, or do you think that the way that you interact with women echoes the way that a lot of males your age interact with women?
What do you mean? Like, do you think? I feel like
So do you think you're like some super hyper intuitive person who somehow understands the very needs of women?
No. I'm not a mind reader, but I am very good at picking up body cues. It's just through my experiences.
Do you think other people think they're good at
life.
picking up body cues?
Huh? Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
how
of
people
course.
generally interact with people is body cues. I mean, yeah, outside of language.
Right. So you're not a
body
unique
language.
individual in this term, right?
Am I what?
You're not a specifically unique individual in this, right? You don't have like some secret source that some other dude is using.
Nor are you 100% correct.
So, no, I never said it. I've already said multiple
you're like a pretty
times
average guy, right?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. So
I'd
if we
say
went
so.
to like polling, right, the mean numbers, or like studies on these things, right, we would pretty much be able to find some similar conclusions as to what Kino is mentioning, right? The women do feel that in a lot of dating situations, there's a lot of leverage on them, and then in certain situations, they feel like they aren't receiving enough consent in these situations. If I could find these pollings and studies for you, if you would find that to be a threshold evidence that you would find to be convincing.
So this might actually be the opportunity for me to, I understand before all this like before this whole conversation, I know that women feel uncomfortable sometimes in those scenarios. A lot of the time, actually. I mean, that's just, but it's on the man, I think, more so than anything, as being the one that typically initiates the interaction to make them feel as comfortable as possible. And what I've been saying this whole time, and what I will continue saying, is that I don't feel that the way that there's been a couple times where I've definitely made girls feel awkward. And again, if you want to hear the story, I mean, it's super cringy, like very cringy. It involves me being naked in a heater. It's fucking.
It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine.
We're good.
It's fine. Okay.
So what I'm saying is,
hold on. Sorry. We will get. Yeah, hold on. So
cut the mic.
We gotta move this forward any which way because we've been here for a while. All right, so I want to go. I'm going to Steven. I'm going to go to Kingfish. Then I'm going to go to Joe. All right, Steven.
Yeah, I mean, I think I disagree with a lot of the ways that Universe's perspective on this, but just as like this conversation is a huge waste of time because the feeling you're getting is you're basically trying to convince a guy that he's like a rapist / predator. That's like the feeling that this conversation gives off, and I don't think that these types of conversations are productive. I think that having really good conversations about consent and then the benefits to both parties of consent are really good ways to bring people's ideas around. But I think constantly like hammering a person, saying like, you're basically a predator, right? You're basically a predator, right? You might have raped women before and not known it, right? Is a really negative way to go about this conversation, and probably like unintentionally triggers the fuck out of a lot of people listening to it. Just as my offering.
Well, just to be fair, y'all aren't going to convince me that what I've done was predatory.
Don't worry. All right, so Kingfish, and then we're going to Joe. Kingfish.
So what all I want to say, right, and this is to you, Universe, right? I know you don't feel like what you're doing is wrong. What you feel like is right, obviously, right? Or else you wouldn't be doing it. You're obviously not a rapist. But what I would encourage, right, is that even if you do feel like you're doing it right, I would still look back on that, right, and inspect what you're really doing. Because I used to feel the same way, right? Like I used to feel like I was doing right whenever I was interacting with women, and I was an incel.
It's for me. You don't have sex.
Let him finish, please.
Well, he's good. He's a cool guy. But no, it's like I'm just saying that more as a way I interacted with women, right? Even though I felt like what I was doing was fine, like I would keep looking at it, right? And at first I thought it was fine, but the more you look at it, it's like, wow, man, I was a piece of shit. Like or not a piece of shit, but I was weird, right? And I would encourage you to do the same thing, because even if you don't feel like you're doing something wrong, there might be something that like you're just missing, right? That's why I would encourage you, even if you feel like you're doing it right, just look back on it, just to make sure.
Okay, so I wanted to go to Joe, let's be serious here. Someone I actually really respect on these issues, though our views may not be completely aligned here. So I'm very curious as to what she has to say. Joe.
You're muted, Joe.
Yeah, you're muted.
Oh, no.
I don't respect her as a streamer.
You're beautiful, but
not a streamer.
I'm a really quality streamer. No, I don't think we disagree that much, to be honest. I just have a real issue with the way that the entire conversation about sexual interactions is centered on consent, which is basically a legal concept for a woman not to be violated. And I think we overload this term to the point of it bloating to represent things like pleasure and respect and reciprocity. And so a lot of the things that are actually getting talked about by people that I'm hearing is not actually related to consent and more related to these other concepts which are important to talk about, that we never get to talk about, because instead we try and say, oh, well, no, it has to be enthusiastic consent, or it has to be, it has to be this kind of consent. And then it sort of means that what happens beyond that isn't important. And I think there's a really good conversation to have about women's pleasure and desire and how that has historically been denied. I also think there's an important conversation to have about bad sex and how you can have bad sex and that isn't sexual assault. But instead of expanding the lexicon and actually coming up with the vocabulary to talk about these experiences, we load it down to perfect sex and assault, and it's really reductive and not helpful. And actually, Destiny brought it up earlier. The other really important thing in this conversation is negotiated consent. The fact that just because you consent once doesn't mean that you're consenting to everything and anything that happens after. But if you pair that with the discussion around enthusiastic consent, you're sometimes putting women into a managerial role where it's like, yes, keep going. Yes, that's great. Amazing. And it's this pleasure danger continuum where you are negotiating. Sex is something you have together. It needs to be negotiated. It can't just be one person giving a thumbs up every 20 seconds.
Mm-hmm. Well, do you guys remember the Aziz Ansari case that happened a few years ago? Like, I don't know if you ever read that Jezebel article. I'd heard that he was a rapist and everything. And when I read that, it was exactly what you said, Silly Serious, that it didn't read as him being predatory or a rapist. He just came off like he was a bad lover, right?
It was super fucking awkward because she came out after and she was like, I really, really wanted to have sex with him. I really wanted to, and he made it like really awkward. It's just like, yo, chill for like a little bit and let's like go into this like slightly slowly. It was
So I think it's really important what Silly Serious said, that just because we're all getting a little ahead of ourselves, and just to draw that line of like, to know exactly what we're talking about, that this is not like, we're not talking about like rape.
So, but I on that point, Joe, we've talked about this a long time before, and we've never, and we won't be able to have a full conversation on this large panel. It won't happen. But I don't think what people are asking for is what you're saying, right? Like, unless you're just saying something extreme to be hyperbolic, right? But like having to check in every 20 seconds, right? Like, there is a difference to simply, sorry, I got trolls in chat. Hold on, just dealing with that.
I'll get on it too.
Yeah, no problem. There's a difference between checking in, right? Like just simply checking with your partner and making sure they are comfortable, that everything's a-okay with them, and that like we're still within the consent territory, the wonderful land of consent, right? And we haven't strayed into the land of this is uncomfortable for me, right? Like there's
a difference.
Okay.
This negotiated thing, right? Like this ongoing thing. Some people check in verbally. Some people are more physical, and that's discovered over the course of a relationship. And as consent is a legal concept. It is used within sexual assault law. So the more we try and load onto it, like the more what you're really talking about is respect and reciprocity and something happening between two people. It doesn't have to be yes, no, no, of course you're not a bad person for asking your partner. Of course that's not the morally wrong thing to do. I'm just saying to suggest that consent is necessary constantly, and I think these are false binaries being presented where you're saying, well, aren't I a good person for checking in? Of course, but like you're arguing that as if it's a necessary thing.
No, hold on.
It might not be true.
No, I'm not. I don't. Okay, so one, like, if you're saying that the word consent is overloaded, then sure, great. Like, if you're saying that it's not a precise enough term to describe all the situations that happen between, I was gonna say consenting adults, but between two adults, right, who are agreeing to be there, okay, right? Okay, sure. But all we're talking about is simply, I don't know, and maybe I'm missing your point. It's very much a possibility. But all we're talking about is simply making sure that your partner is comfortable, understanding that, like, there at any point in time, a person.
But comfort is different from consent.
Exactly. Sure. Fine. I can agree with you that maybe we're not using proper terms for that. That maybe we need to expand the lexicon on this. And in fact, I remember you've talked exactly about this before, right? And that when we're talking about this, and with the language of assault, for instance, that those terms are too limited. I get that, right? Sure, comfort can be expressed in different ways, obviously, right? But how do you figure that out, right? Yes, it can happen over time, but initially you're just going to have to ask.
Other terms we don't talk about, like reciprocity and respect, other terms that we don't get to talk about because everything comes down to consent constantly.
Agreed. I mean, like, if that's what you're saying, then we just need to expand the definitions, right? Then okay, sure. Socrates, go ahead, and then Stephen.
Okay, yeah, I mean, just to piggyback off of this, to put this into like the broadest type of philosophical framework that you could, like the reason that it's respectful and it's good to check in constantly for consent, whatever, not constantly, but like, is if I care about somebody either individually or just because they're a human being, whatever, I don't want them to be hurt. And I specifically don't want to do something that because I lacked some information, I ended up hurting somebody, right? And then the question is, how far is too far to go into trying to prevent something that somebody says that they want to engage in, that they could be hurt, right? So there's a level where like we would never interact with anybody ever if we wanted to make certain that we would never hurt them, never do something to hurt them. There's a reasonable level at which we engage in this, right?
Is that to me?
If anybody agrees or disagrees,
yes,
or something to
right.
add.
I also
Steven.
Whoops. Yeah, I mean, I agree that like there are lots of cool conversations to have about like actually talking about sex. I think the reason why I think that you can have conversations about consent that don't really have anything to do with the legal definition, which I think it's important to understand. I think that getting good consent from somebody is like a necessary condition for good sex, but it's obviously not sufficient for good sex. There's a whole bunch more that goes into that. I think the reason why the conversation revolves so much around consent is because there's still so much confusion about that. I do agree that conversations of like, how do you have an ongoing like good time with somebody? It would be like cool to have. That's just like an entirely different conversation, I think, right?
Okay. Yeah, I guess maybe. I don't know.
Like my process, if I'm engaged in, so generally the most important consent checks that I'm ever doing is going to be with a new partner.
Okay.
With somebody that I have an established relationship with, it's usually way easier to like, I know if you're into this or not. I know you're sick. With a new person, it's way, way, way harder to tell. But the types of checks that I do mentally, there are things that I'm going to be asking a new partner that I will never, ever ask somebody that I have a lot of experience with. So like, it might be something as dumb as like, if I'm with a new partner where we're changing positions and I'm like, you feel okay? Like I might see something really quickly. I'm never going to ask that to like my fiance or like a girlfriend or like because I know if you feel okay or not. But like those types of ongoing like consent checks are that would be like just to make sure somebody still feels safe. Now, in terms of like somebody feeling good or like actually like pleasuring somebody or going those are cool conversations to have. It's in a totally different domain, I think, than the consent conversation. Is my opinion.
Well, I think they're like related, but it's like a fun versus like a moral level.
I would disagree with that.
Yeah, do you?
But the thing is that these people keep saying, "Oh, what if we're having sex and I don't realize that she's not enjoying it because she's not consenting," and they're conflating it as if like I think if you should be checking in on your partner enough to be able to work out that they haven't consented. That's different from them having a good time. That's extravagantly good.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I just think these are like two really different. I mean, I agree. It's really important to make sure your partner's having a good time. But I might have completely missed it, but I didn't hear anybody here like mixing up like, oh, like I think that I'm really bad at fucking, so everyone's gonna think I'm a rapist because they're not having a good time, so I'm not getting consent. Like I didn't hear that train of thought. Maybe I missed it or whatever. But I just think those are like very
no one said that.
I was gonna say like piggybacking off that, like in terms of like the broader conversation, do you feel like say some people like I'm not like adding anyone like in this particular conversation. I don't think this is like particularly relevant to anyone like in this like particular chat. How many say people are concerned or hesitant to have like the conversation like about consent and like this broader conversation about like how we're supposed to interact in the sexual marketplace if they feel like they've had like an encounter in the past that they feel is like, oh, like under these like rules, like I potentially like, made someone really uncomfortable during sex, so like now I am like a potential rapist, like that sort of thing. Like how many people do you feel like are say like becoming more problematic because they are inherently defensive because of that like potential stigma for them? They're like, oh, like I had one bad sexual experience or someone had one bad sexual experience with me, and now if I like say kowtow to the like obviously correct idea of like like informed consent, like in like enthusiastic consent, I am now a potential rapist. So please no one clip that. I don't want to get canceled. Just a conversation.
Already done.
I'm fucked.
Okay. We'll go to Dr. K then. Sharpie has been waiting for quite a while.
Well, no. So, like, I think Silly and Hans are both kind of correct in this. In that, if you want these sort of things to work, if you want this to all flow nicely, you have to sort of set up this sort of expanded lexicon beforehand, right? By teaching this, in our relationships that exist far before any sort of relationship occurs, right? Like that's something that needs to be sort of language that exists in the background as you're kind of growing up in your life even. But amongst like when it comes to these words, right, and to doing good informed consent and stuff like this, like this is you know, a conversation that's kind of always ongoing, as most conversations tend to be, right? Where, you know, you're not just asking like, hey, are you into this, or sort of thing. You aren't just popping that randomly when you're having sex. You're talking about this, you know, beforehand or whenever, right? It's like something you can bring up just as easily as like, you know, what color is the sky where you're at, or you know, what's your favorite color pizza or whatever, right? And so I think that consent is the starting point for a very good conversation that leads to that sort of reflects on your sexual relationship. But I think that consent is exactly that. It's the starting point, and then like the more advanced lexicon is something that follows. Basically, like as consent is sort of affirmed, then you can begin to have this more advanced conversation that Silly is suggesting. And I think that, you know, for a good relationship, I generally would recommend for that kind of conversation to follow.
Okay, go ahead, Sharpie.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to backtrack a little bit, but like, I don't think anybody was trying to make the argument to the point that they think that Universe is engaging in like rapist behavior. Like, I don't think that was a fair
Are we still talking about
contextualization
me?
to make. Like the point that we were making about Universe is that he seems
do we
to
have
be
to make it about
arguing
him?
that like he can just read context clues and that he doesn't need to actually like ask girls any questions because he can just interpret their body language and know what they mean, like know if they're consenting or not based off of that. Like, and we're trying to point out that as a guy, that's not a safe thing to do. Like, you need more than just that. There's a good reason for actually engaging audibly with individuals, like, and getting verbal consent and knowing what's actually going on, more than just like reading their body and saying, "Oh yeah, they totally are into this."
Okay. Look, I want to say I think where y'all are coming from on this is valid. Like if you feel like you should ask the girl or you want to ask her, by all means. I just think there's ways of getting consent that doesn't have to be, do you want this, or is this how, you know, I think there's a lot more natural, and I think there are women that would prefer that as opposed to just a straight up question. I think some people, it would make me feel awkward if a girl was like, hey, you want to bone? Even as a guy who wants to bone everything that walks, like that would perturb me. That would turn me off a little bit. It's a weird kind of vibe to get. And especially if you're going to start the conversation off like that, in my experience,
No
it's
one's
just not-
saying that,
What if
dude.
she's into pegging?
Dude, if she's into, I've experimented. It's not that bad.
Point her my way.
Do you not get how you're not giving a fair opportunity at consent?
How am I not giving a fair opportunity? I think again, I can't unless
Because
without
not
you
everyone
being
communicates the way that you communicate, right?
But there are a lot, but a lot of people
so
do.
we have to be sure of things. Like we
And
don't
this
just.
is why I said I respect the way that y'all want to go about it. That's fine. But in my experience, and again, in my personal experience, my own personal experience. So without y'all being there, without, you know, whatever, you don't know how that went down. So saying, oh, how do you know? Well,
But
I mean,
you
I'm
don't
going
either.
based on, yeah, I do, because I was
No,
fucking
you
there.
don't.
I had sex with the
You
chick. I know how it
interpreted
went
body
after.
My dude is
Okay,
Mr.
yeah.
Fantastic. He can read minds. It's all good.
I'm not saying I can read minds. I'm just saying there are body cues. There's body language and there's natural language between.
Do you think that a
people.
girl can give you a body
Also,
cue
Mr.
that you
Fantastic
interpret
has
as
super
yes
intelligence
and yet
and
want to
stretchy
say
powers.
no?
It's entirely different.
Okay.
Do you think that a girl can
I
give you a
actually
body
think body
cue that
language can be a
you
really good
believe
cue.
says yes?
Right. The problem is how different it is based on like cultures and stuff. But if you're like really, if you have a lot of experience having sex with like within a certain subculture and you're pretty confident in that, then I don't see the reason to not be charitable there.
So
I think you can
body
have
language
verbal
could work the
consent.
other way, right? So I don't want to say that body language is necessarily like more important than less important than like verbal cues as well.
Sorry.
Since they can both be very obvious.
Sure.
Can I
Hey, sorry, Steve.
throw
Hold on, one second. Steven, I think you were trying to say something. Then we'll go to Joe. And then Deny and Billy, I'll let you in. All right.
Yeah, so real quick, like I don't think body language is sufficient, but like to sit here and pretend that like, oh, you read her body language, you must be a fucking minor. Like, no, I mean, like people have very obvious body language cues. And then also to push back on the other side of that, verbal consent is insufficient. It is a like complicated like negotiation of both the things. This is very possible to get a yes from somebody that is very clearly not comfortable. Like to sit here and like rail him, like, how do you know those girls were into it? Like blah blah blah. Like there's a difference between like a girl that is like, you know, like happy and cuddling with you afterwards, you go to sleep, versus somebody that's like shivering in the corner who's like traumatized and you've got like the door locked. Okay.
Yeah,
Now,
and that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, and
I
now
only
again,
know
like,
from my own personal experience.
To be clear, yeah. Like I don't necessarily agree with Universe's like prescription that like he doesn't want to, whatever, for whatever reason. And I don't know if he'll ever change his mind on that. But like the chiding and the crazy, like, oh, like how could you be a mind reader? Like, is a little bit insane in my opinion. Like that's like going way too far.
Okay.
Something that was brought up earlier that I think was really important. I don't know if Sirius has said this in the past, but you made it sound like that, Primecayes. The idea that we use the same words for everything makes it really fucking hard to ever redeem yourself for past behavior. Like, I have been involved in behavior on stream, actually, that is just very clearly sexually assault, 100%. Like, I've gotten insanely fucking drunk out of my mind with somebody, and I've grabbed their boobs before on stream. And really, it is sexual assault. But like, saying something like that because of all the implications that go along with that that's a really tall order for most people to be okay with, because it's like when you say sexual assault, the thing that's evoked is like the closest you can get to raping somebody without doing it. Like that's like the feeling that you get. And it sucks that we have like the same words for everything. It would feel so much better if we had, and I know like I don't want to say SJWs, but some people are gonna get mad. It's like, oh, you're trivializing the behavior. Like it would be nice if we had words that were a bit gentler to describe things, because I think it would make people more willing to accept like, oh yeah, there's behavior that I used to engage in that's like pretty coercive and like kind of rapey and like, yeah, pretty sexual assault. Like that's a really hard thing. I wouldn't expect most people to ever be able to come out and just admit that. Because I think it's a really tall order for people.
Joe.
So then that's
Joe. Joe.
No, I agree with so much of that. That's pretty much what I wanted to say in terms of beware about saying that men, that body language is sufficient, isn't sufficient, because that's often used as an excuse by men to be like, oh, I couldn't read her body language. Yeah, she said yes, I had no idea about her body language. So while it's not sufficient necessarily, it's not necessarily, you don't have to have a verbal yes for it to be consent. You don't just have to have body language. It's more complicated than that. And yeah, the lexicon thing also for women is a big deal, right? You don't want women to understand their sexual history only through the lens of trauma, right? Because I know there are definitely occasions where women experience things, we talk about it, and someone inevitably goes, you realize you were sexually assaulted, right?
Oh,
you realize that was sexual assault. And that actually changes how you sort of document that and feel about your sex life, when really there's a whole myriad of things. And if you make it this really reductive and impossible binary between the best sex of my life and rape, it's very hard for women to ever be sexually liberated, because there's no space for them to make mistakes and grow as sexual people.
Okay, sure. Next, we'll go to who did I say was next? Deniability. Go ahead.
I got my massive spanner. I'm hoping to get some violent disagreements, and I think that's a great way to enter. So these sort of mirrors a lot of what I wanted to say. I think that there's when you look at the whole yes means yes thing, if you're a 35-year-old man, as I am, I can get behind it. I can go for yes means yes. I've got all the confidence about me. I'm sexually experienced, and I've got no problem going through that, and more often than not, I have even more awkward conversations with new sexual partners, because I like to get into the best sex of my life. So I before we get into it, I discuss preferences and I go through all that, so totally behind it. However, my specific concern is the 16-year-old boy child. And I think back to the 16-year-old boy child that I was. It's all well and good to say, boys should be more empathetic and they should be more tactful in their approach to women, and they should be aware of all these things. I can promise you, at 16 years old, when you're driven by hormones, you're not aware of shit, and you're so scared about approaching this attractive being that you want to like you in some way, that the best you can muster is some stupid, corny pickup line, and invariably you use it and you get slapped across the face, and you go, okay, I'm not exactly sure what I did wrong. I know that I did something wrong. But then you move on to the next girl, and maybe you say half of that and you don't get a slap. Okay, that other half, that was a problem. Let's not do that again. And the sort of emotionally secure, mature man I am today, there was a path towards getting there. There was a path towards gaining the confidence to talk about anything with a woman and bring up awkward conversations. I'm not so sure if we're pushing this yes means yes, and we are now describing that learning process as harmful. For sure, okay, let's say that. But where else do you propose men gain that learning experience? Because fundamentally, the human mating ritual is predicated
I have
on
addressed
men
just
approaching.
that.
So if men are required to approach to get things going, how do you get all that wealth of experience and knowledge that I now have at 35 into a 16-year-old boy's mind?
Go ahead.
I literally answered this earlier.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, you cultivate it like at home. You know, it's something that needs to be cultivated by the family, by sex ed, and as a sort of reflection of both the media you consume and the languages you are taught, you know, by those around you. Like
we'll go to Joe, and then we'll go to Stephen.
That's what I was talking about when I'm talking about collapsing too much into this idea of consent. This is why I brought it up, because I've heard so many stories now of people saying, oh, I was uncomfortable, or I got, rejected, and this is my contribution to the conversation on consent. And I'm sorry you felt uncomfortable. I'm sure the little girl who rejected you felt uncomfortable too. Like, unfortunately, we all go through this. It's learning a little bit of rejection, and maybe, yes, socially there is too much on the men because of outdated gender dating sort of rituals, but this is the problem with collapsing it all into a broader conversation of consent, because you getting rejected isn't the same as a woman not giving consent.
Yeah, but see, that's totally fine, and I think men need to be rejected, and I see that as a critical part of the human mating ritual. But I worry about. I think it was the person before you speaking. I can't remember their name. They're raising how there's a process involved in sort of learning that is now being stretched to be classified as sexual harassment. Like, we're broadening these terms, I feel, a bit too far, because I may be wrong about this. I mean, there's so many weird and wonderfuls out there, but I believe in some places it's now considered sexual harassment if you try to engage a woman in flirtatious behavior and she doesn't find you attractive. It's therefore
that's not
unwanted.
the case anywhere, dude.
Okay, like I said, I could be wrong.
Okay,
you are. It's all good.
So let's
something
go ahead,
something
Stephen.
that, yeah. So like, this is stuff that has to be learned through experience. Fuck, hold on, I don't know the names. For Dr. K, like, you can't learn this in the household. No amount of conversations with your parents is going to
No,
help
but you can prep.
Barely, but like, this is stuff that is just going to be experienced like through experience. It's literally the only way you can learn it. Something that Silly said, I can't believe I've had conversations about this before. I think that it is so incredibly important, and I don't know if this comes off as like a super hot take. We really need to be able to acknowledge that, especially as teenagers, we can have horrible fucking sexual experiences that were just shitty and fucking awkward and just crazy bad, and maybe even the guy was too pushy and the girl was the girl could be too pushy, without it being like a traumatic rape and horrible experience. Like, I think we need to be able to have that type of perspective on our lives. I feel like a stereotype for saying this, but I've unironically had conversations with women before that I don't know if this is possible in psychology, but have like retroactively traumatized themselves on sexual experiences, where somebody would say like, oh yeah, like, when I was 17, my boyfriend came over and he was really horny and he pressured me into like, blowing him, and I didn't want it. And, originally I thought it was just like awkward, but now that I'm like 27 and I look back on it, I think I was fucking raped. And it actually totally like woke my
that
gun.
is a real phenomenon you should take seriously.
That is no. On the opposite, I think that it is a real phenomenon, and you have to be very careful of this, that can be bad, but we have to stop like ascribing so much malintent and load so many like early sexual interactions in such a way that people are literally getting traumatized by what I would say is like relatively normal and even somewhat healthy sexual exploration. There are going to be incredibly awkward interactions between guys and girls. There are going to be things that 15-year-olds are going to do to other 15-year-olds that if they were both 30, it would be full on or almost rape, or it would be sexual assault, or it would just be totally unacceptable, wildly fucking unacceptable. But like when you're growing up and you're a teenager, you have to learn that through experience. And we have to be like having active conversations on it. We should have like an environment where people feel safe to talk about it. This is stuff where in the household, after you've had an experience, if you felt safe enough to talk to your mom or dad about it, that would be so incredibly positive. Or at least have some older role models in your life, older siblings or teachers maybe, or sex educators that you could talk to about it. That'd be awesome. But we have to stop labeling, especially people before the age of like before the age of 18, this idea that like at 15, 16 years old, like people are getting raped by people that are just having these awkward encounters. The Azir, I think was his name.
Azir,
yeah, is a really good example of like, this was just an incredibly awkward and horrible like sexual encounter. Nothing about this was even remotely rape. And if you're getting traumatized over stuff like this, it might be possible that your engagement with sexual behavior is incredibly toxic and is like hurting like the overall discourse on like how to encourage healthy sexual behavior among people.
Well,
I would say that
one thing there.
Go ahead.
And
do that, and then we're going to go to Hans. You've been waiting very patiently, but go ahead.
Yeah. And to slightly agree with Dr. K, I mean, I take your point, Destiny. Like you can teach a teenager as much as you like, but then they're going to be driven by their hormones and go learn the hard way. That seems to bear out in the evidence. So yeah, you can't really foster in the home environment, but there is something that I think that we've moved away from, that used to be fostered in the home environments. And forgive me for this religious take, but I'm not religious. It's just something I found to be true over my experience. I now believe almost exclusively in monogamous sex because it is literally the only way to get the best sex of your life. And I got there through a very casual approach to sex in my younger years, and I had multiple sexual partners and a lot of casual sex, and I wasn't happy about it. It didn't. I had trivialized sex to the point where it was just like getting off, and it wasn't enjoyable, and I had to take a long break from that to sort of reset, and I went celibate for about 3 years before I.
Okay, this is a long story, so this is a really long story. Like,
I'll wrap it up. But
mucho texto.
Yeah, we don't.
But basically, when you're sort of engaging in the sexual encounters, I think a lot of the psychological trauma comes from the fact that sex isn't meant to be casual. It's not meant to just like be a notch on your belt.
You're right. I disagree with that too. You can have casual sex. Use a space for casual sex.
Yeah,
of course you can.
Casual sex is awesome.
Yeah, casual sex is great.
Yeah. But I think what he's saying is that sex can be a very important and chemically imbalancing thing as well. I mean, it's casual sex is.
No, that's not what he said. He said you didn't say that though. You're just putting.
I'm
trying
to
give him.
but
he didn't say that. I'm just saying.
You did ask me to wrap up quickly. That is where I was going. Is that like psychologically, if we're just having sex for the sake of sex and we're missing all the pair bonding and relationship stuff around that, then I can totally see how women could retroactively be psychologically harmed because there is something missing from that sexual experience. Is the love, the relationship, the respect between individuals. All that goes out the window with casual sex is just about getting off. And when they express
I love you're injecting your own values
yeah,
here.
I disagree hard with this. Go ahead, Steven. You wanted to tackle this?
Yeah, just real quick in a response to that, I have had a decent amount of casual sex. I think that there are new things that I can learn from different sexual partners, and different people's bodies just feel different, and different people just do and like different things. And I've like encountered sex with people where I didn't even think that something could be the way that it was, and it was awesome. There was a long-term partner that I had, and when we started, they were a virgin, and it was easily some of the worst sex I've ever had in my entire life. And by the end of that relationship, I would say that the sexual interactions that I was having with that person were some of the best in my life, better than people that have been very experienced that I've had one-night stands with. There is a variety of the type of sex you can have. I think that sometimes in a response to the hyper-monogamy of Christian families, we tend to push this idea that everybody should have casual sex all the time and blah, 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 blah. I think it's really important to understand that lots of different types of sexual relationships exist. For some people, sex is actually like a pretty emotional, kind of sort of bonded experience. And they actually do get way more out of it when they have that emotional connection. I'm not like that, but some people are. are. And if they are just having like one night stands, they're never going to have that type of connection. And then also in the second part, in terms of just pure technique, I'll defend this to the death, and I'll say this for everybody. The best sex that you will have is going to be with somebody that is familiar with your body. And that is just built up as experience over time. I enjoy one night stands, but they are never as satisfying as like long-term like sexual partners. I would rather have like 3 or 4 long-term sexual partners than like a new sexual partner every single night, just because you know each other so much better. So like there is like elements of truth to what he's saying. I just be careful not to just like, whenever someone's like monogamous sex is better, blah blah blah, like, well, you should say for you, but don't just hand wave it and be like, oh, like no way, like tons of partners is way better. Like it really depends on what you're after.
So this is what
he's injecting his own values.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is that I guess maybe aligned to what you were saying is that I don't like the blanket statement that like sex can't be casual, for instance, right? Like for you certainly, but like I think yes, people can have beautiful. Look, Oh, okay. Well, since we're all sharing, most of my encounters have been casual, right? And
King.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Prime, you're telling them about us? No.
Yeah. Most of my encounters have been casual. And I don't want to. Basically, what I really don't want to, because I think what happens is like, and I don't think you were just saying this, but we end up like infantilizing women oftentimes, right? Like saying that like what they can and cannot do, like with their emotional needs, right? There are people, as Destiny said, men and women, right, in the non-binary, who really require that connection, right? Like, and they don't want sex without it, right? Like, and sex feels terrible without it, and that's definitely something to be acknowledged. But yes, there are women who just enjoy like just, well, quote unquote, getting off, right, or whatever it is. Like everyone runs this full the full spectrum here, right? So like to say it's like a blanket statement that, well, sex is for intimacy, right? Well, no, not everyone agrees, right?
For Prime, you could have sex with one person. You can have casual sex with like a regular partner, right? Like it's not like this mutually exclusive thing, right? I think like the point that's being made is just like having a regular partner and having more experience with that partner is just going to lead to better sex rather than just,
But I'm not sure that's what he didn't say that though.
Like on average.
Yeah, but he didn't say that. I mean, that's what you're saying. Okay, sure, but that's not. That's
I'm
not
trying
what
to
he
be
said.
charitable.
Sure, fair enough. All right,
I
Hans.
think that's only what he was saying. I think he was like including a relationship, love, like all of the other things, that there's more to the sex at that point.
Hans, go ahead.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think this might be like a bit better in terms of conversation. So Destiny, you were talking earlier about like say how the definitions we have can lead to extremely like frustrating conversations, or like how like we're able to define like these different things, right? So like the 3 basic definitions most people have are like harassment, like sexual harassment and sexual assault, and then like rape, right? So like somewhere like in there are like plenty of like uncomfortable things that like on like textbook definitions, like you could say like, oh, like this is like technically this, like technically X. I would ask like specifically, and if you don't like have like a like strict textbook definition for anyone right now, like it's entirely fine. I'm only asking you because like I've seen like a lot of your shit, so like I know like you're pretty good like on the spot stuff like this. How would you say define, or like what additional like levels or definitions would you provide so we could have this conversation better about say awkward sexual experiences, as opposed to say classifying everything as like potentially assault or potentially like rape or like harassment? How would you define that? What additional levels would you provide to make this a more constructive conversation?
For me, you'd literally have to like make up new words. I couldn't do it on the spot. I'm just saying that it's really hard for people to accept like the negativity of their actions when one word kind of commits you to like a whole spectrum of horrendous behavior, you know?
Yep, entirely fair. Sorry, I didn't mean to like, yo, everyone, I subbed Destiny. I won, but like, look, I love your shit, man. I'm sorry.
I would caution getting a little too hand wavy with it, though.
So, okay. Tom Foolery, you haven't got much of a chance to speak, so I want to make sure you get in on this. Yeah.
There was something I wanted to go back to earlier, I guess with Socrates. I wanted to ask, you were talking about making out with somebody at a club, and then like, you move on and you feel like it's weird, they're following you around. I want to know, like,
it's exactly like that.
Well, I mean, if my question is unfair, then rephrase.
No, it's fine. It's fine. Say it and I'll respond.
I want to know, like, at what point, and I'm not saying you did this, but I just like from the context that I got from it, at what point is this some sort of like leading somebody on? Like leading somebody on could get to like emotional abuse. Like, I want to know. Like, I think that these things are super common where like you're not upfront with how casual you are with this, and the other person will normally read into it. And so I guess like my question is like, should you tell people right up front that this should be casual making out real quick, like, or to avoid that happening to them? Like what?
Okay. So yeah, I'm really happy that you asked this question. This like that experience was just, it's like it was similar to like that scene in the Matrix where Neo gets like taken out of the machine and he wakes up and he's like in the world. It was like one of those experiences where you just see the world flipped and you're like, fuck, oh shit. Like I suddenly can see like, myself from the outside, from the third person. I didn't make out with this dude and then fucking peace. It was like, you know, sometimes I wanted to break.
Hey, was there maybe some body language thrown in there a little bit?
It was like at some points it was like, okay, like, you know, maybe I want to dance with other people. I had been dancing with other people before that. Maybe I want to like, stop making eye contact for a little bit. It's not even like I was like, oh, I never want to see you again. I never want to make out with you for the rest of the night. It was just like, you know, maybe a little like push and pull, and I'm like, it was a super interesting experience because it's like, okay, this is definitely things that I can recognize in my own behavior. And I also want to be really clear, because I think there are a lot of reasons that people can be defensive, men can be defensive, like in this conversation. I want to be really clear when I'm talking about like men do this or men do this. Probably a lot of the time I should just say like like either I'm speaking from personal experience or I'm talking about things that I see like generally culturally in the world, in the same way that men are socialized to maybe not see these things as easily, and women are socialized to go along with these things. Those are the types of like broad cultural strokes that I'm making reference to. I'm not saying all men are this way, right? But yeah, thank you for that question. I think that's really important.
So you were just saying that he just felt like you guys were paired.
It was just like, that's it. It was like, okay. Made out. Now it's like, boom, this is life from now on forever.
So we've been going at this for a while, so I want to make sure like the final people who want to say something get a chance to say something. I want to make sure all the women in the panel get a last chance to say anything on this issue as well, definitely.
Prime, I never shut up.
I know.
Okay, so wait.
It's Eris?
In conclusion, can you hear me?
Yes, Eris, please.
So in conclusion, we all agree now, right, that you should not fuck your fans.
No, I don't agree on that.
I was 100% different.
We kind of like steered away from that. I think like it was much more productive after we like went away from that into like the broader like consent.
No, like playing with nuclear fuel.
No, this
is not why we all got into streaming.
Yeah,
I don't know you, Tom, but like I have plenty of sex IRL. Like what's wrong with you, man?
Steven, so
listen, I get too much coochie offline. Like
Steven, you're the biggest person here by far. Okay, but yeah, just your final statement on this, or at least, well, hold on. Yeah, what do you think? Should you fuck your fans? Is there an opportunity to do this in a safe and consensual? I know we're not supposed to say that anymore, but I don't know what to say. But safe and consensual way.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So the way that I brought this up before is that power dynamics exist in every single sexual relationship, unless you're literally fucking your twin. Like every single sexual relationship is going to have power dynamics. Some power dynamics make it such that it's impossible to negotiate consent. So for instance, if a teacher is propositioning a student, the student can't say no without understanding that there might or might not be consequence, right? So we would say that it's impossible for there to ever be consent there. When it comes to like fan and celebrity relationships, or e-celebrity relationships, that is a type of interaction that is ripe for abuse, but it's not necessarily abusive. There are ways that fans could interact, or there are ways that like e-celebs could interact with fans in incredibly toxic ways, where you notice a fan is maybe emotionally compromised, you notice this person is doing things that like they probably wouldn't ordinarily agree to, and you're probably taking advantage of that. Like that's on you, the celebrity, to kind of notice. But it's also totally possible that a fan is capable of interacting with a celebrity in such a way that you can have a sexual relationship. It's not like the end of the world. It's not always going to be horrible. Basically, my summary on it is like these types of relationships are definitely prone to be abusive, and they absolutely could be. And there's more potential than like any two random people meeting for these to be abusive, but they're not necessarily abusive. And as long as you're being responsible, like there are ways that you could approach those, I think, in a healthy manner.
Okay. Does that
I've
work
been
for
in a
you?
relationship.
Does that work for you,
Sorry,
Aris?
go ahead.
Good. Well said.
Wait, Tom, you have fans?
Yeah, right.
No,
that,
oh,
man.
That's not where I was
That
going to go.
was
I was
so
going to say
fucking
I was in
mean.
a relationship where there was a power imbalance, but the entire time, like I made sure to explain that the entire time. It was somebody that used to work for me, and she was a little bit younger than me, legal age, but she was younger than me. And the whole time, like I tried to make sure that I was responsible by explaining what the power imbalance was, and I thought that that was the best way to handle it. I don't
know if I'm allowed to chime in there. So I would say that like an employer-employee relationship can never be done responsibly.
Used to be my employee, not currently. Yes.
Oh, okay.
You're
Then
right.
you know what? Then I
Used to
absolutely
be.
forget everything I say. Because again, like if a boss propositions an employee, the employee
They can't say no.
Yeah, they don't know if they can. Maybe they could, but they have no way of knowing.
I know a couple. Two of my friends at work.
Because of the implication.
He made sure he fired. He made sure he fired her.
Fired her, and then.
So don't worry.
Hey, bitch, you're fired for Friday night. Like, yeah, like.
So
no power dynamics. I'm just gonna ruin your sole source of income first. Like now, there's no issue with us.
Don't worry,
You're
Joe.
welcome.
We're gonna go to you. Don't worry. We will go to you. I just want to check in with Eris. Eris, what do you think of Steven's answer there?
I think it's legit, right? I agree with all those things. I just think that on average, right, it's just important to be aware and be skeptical of your own fault as a human being. We're not these rational beings that we all assume that we are. And especially when sex is involved, when we all have like these urges, and that can cloud your judgment. So you're often not like you're not the best judge to be making that decision on whether or not it is one of those exceptions. So I think on average, it's a good way to steer away from it. I wouldn't make it illegal because I agree it's like not 100%. But I would say it's generally a bad idea.
Real quick, just because you're Sony, I think in general, I would actually agree with that take. When I look at a lot of my behavior in my very early 20s, I think I was pretty predatory in terms of how I would approach some fans. Absolutely. When I go back and I think, because there are definitely girls that I was leaning into that when I look back on the interactions, they're probably just doing this because they're like huge fans of me. And that takes a lot of self-reflection and a lot of like introspection and a lot of understanding like sexual issues to like be able to have like those types of like healthy relationships with people that might be your fans. I would say the majority of like streamer fan interactions are probably like pretty unhealthy or are pretty toxic. Not prone to toxicity, but are pretty toxic. I would absolutely agree with that 100%.
It's one of the issues with fame. Like I've had moments in my life where I had a pretty substantial like presence, and the way people regard you in those moments and in that kind of environment it's like this kind of objectifying where they've put you on a hill, and it's very hard for them to see you differently. So even if you become friends with them afterwards, there's always this feeling like this dynamic where it does always feel like you're the one with that power, and they're never going to see you as this completely equal in this equal situation.
I'm not famous enough to know one way or the other. So Joe,
I wanted to say, oh my bad. Go ahead.
Joe, go ahead. We'd love to hear what you have to say, especially on this topic because you didn't get to chime in on it. But anything you want to say, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of what Destiny was saying is correct in terms of there are lots of power dynamics, and this includes even I mean, you could change this rule and say, okay, anyone who's a billionaire can't fuck, full stop. Anyone who's poorer than them, they can only screw other billionaires, or anyone who's ridiculously hot cannot screw anyone less attractive than them. You can move this around wherever you want. And I don't know, like every industry sort of has heroes, right? So you can shrink it down. Like, in academia, there might be someone who's super well published and I meet them at a conference. Oh my God. The work dynamic thing, I have an issue with. I understand that there's a really formal agreement there, but when you start to get too categorical about it, women end up paying the price because bonk bans that are put in workplaces ultimately mean that someone has to leave the workplace, and it's usually the woman because she's usually in the less well-paid job. So we spend most of our time at work. A lot of people meet their spouses at work. So it's ultimately a punishment for women in terms of where they can meet partners and ultimately what jobs they can keep if they do fall in love with someone.
But in
I mean,
these
I
power
think there's a
dynamics,
difference between a
There's still a dynamic. There's still a
Yeah,
dynamic. It's still there.
There is a difference though between a coworker and a boss.
Yeah,
but you
in
can
these
fall in love with your
sorry, go ahead.
boss.
I know.
I mean, it just depends on how you. I think, dude. I don't know who did Destiny. You're like, I appreciate your honesty. The amount of honesty you bring to this fucking table is insane, dude. You've said some shit that I'm like, okay, fuck it, whatever. Let's keep rolling. But you said that perfectly, man. I think the way you described this scenario, this whole fucking your fans thing, I think I don't know who could really touch on it to a point past that.
Yeah, sure.
You said it pretty much perfectly, like for all of us. I'm not going to speak for all of us. Sure. At least for me.
Sure. Thank you. But I want to go back to Joe. Yeah, you baited me there because now I'm not sure because okay, look, I've talked about exactly this. I've mentioned this on this stream before that yes, like we make our most people meet each other at work. So many people, well, not most people, but a lot of people meet each other at work, right? Like you spend so much of your time there, right? These people are close to you, sometimes as close as some of your best friends, right? Yeah, you can fall in love there. But within, it's a tough thing to say that like employer-employee relationships are okay. I think there's a way that might happen, but like wouldn't it be better to have a blanket rule, like especially from a company's perspective?
Because if you can disclose, sure, you can have disclosure agreements, but ultimately the way, if you have a ban, this happened in the Australian Parliament. There was a scandal and then a bonk ban was brought in and no ministers were like, there was not allowed to be hierarchical sexual relations within the government, right? But what happens is women are the ones who lose their jobs. Women are most likely to be the people who leave, and therefore they're punished not only financially and professionally, but personally, because they're forced with a choice that often doesn't exist for the man in the relationship. Also, you're talking about full-time employment. What about in like the entertainment industry, where you've got directors and actors and other forms of relationships that aren't necessarily consistent? How do you stop that from happening? Because if a director or a casting director or a producer can put me in a movie, surely that's a power imbalance. But technically, they're not always going to be my employer.
I mean, there doesn't need to be a ban, but I think a stigma against it is fair enough.
Yeah, but no, okay. I want to examine. I know this is so late, and this is such a good topic. But,
fine for me.
I know. Yeah, and for my Australian friends, like I can stay up, but like the problem is that it's just like dealing with the impracticality, right? So in principle, I agree with you, right? And I agree with you. Yeah, like there can be two consenting adults, just like I've talked about here. Two consenting adults can get within a relationship, even though when there's a power imbalance, right? And it can go fine, right? But like I think we need something in place for this because we can understand that there's coercive. An environment can easily happen, right? And it's hard for them, especially I'm thinking as an employer, right? As an employer looking at this, like I'm the CEO, and then my middle management is gets in a relationship with my with one of my workers, right? Like looking at this, how am I supposed to know? How am I supposed to tell?
Of course, but way to lack imagination to think the only way around it is to ban it entirely.
I didn't say that. Hold on. I didn't say that. I literally didn't say that. I said like, how do you deal with this? I never said that. Right?
Okay. The point is, right? So I think the attacking the wrong thing. We know there's advice throughout many industries, even if you do have a complaint, not to go to HR because ultimately you'll be punished for going to HR and report. There's a huge difference between a consensual relationship and a relationship born non-consensually or coercively from a power structure. The way around that is to strengthen and destigmatize HR policies rather than creating a blanket policy so that women can go and report things like this without
not your friend.
Yeah, HR is not your friend.
No, it's not. That's exactly what I'm saying though. That should be changed. You shouldn't be saying actually I'm going to police your behavior entirely. You should change the reporting
or maybe
function that
you should have a union.
There's a bigger thing
that.
here. There's a bigger thing here too. I had my own startup of 3 people. We raised over $120,000, got into like some super exclusive thing, and there was an undercover relationship going on for 7 months. And I'm of the type that's like, oh yeah, relationships, it's all good. I'm a romance, whatever. And it ended up going into us three being board members, and then it was a 2-on-1 dynamic where even if it's nothing wrong with the relationship, there is still a carrying power dynamic that is unavertible as far as I see it. So my stance on this, I know, but my stance on this particular issue is, if you go into the business under an agreement that it is okay to form a relationship if you talk with HR, or if you go into the company knowing that they have a policy that says you can't, you've signed on to that agreement as far as I see it. And my recommendation overall is don't get into relationships in any small company under like 10 or 12 or 15, maybe even under 50.
I mean, yeah, that's good advice overall.
Yeah, but can we? I want to go back to the power and balance part and ask, like, if you do have a large
I think
margin
Prime needs
when
to
it comes
sleep.
to the
No,
power
stop.
and
Don't.
balance.
Keep going.
All right.
Keep going.
When
Tom.
it goes to the power and balance, isn't it best to actually discuss what the power and balance is? Like, that was the first time I had ever been in a relationship that was like that for me. I literally looked stuff up to find like what you're supposed to do in this situation. Like, and they said, like, actually discuss it with each other, like make sure both parties understand like what the power imbalances are. But it seems as though that doesn't change the fact that there's a power imbalance, and it's literally always going to be there anyway. So does that make the like relationship bad in that case? Like,
Feline father.
Thank you. So like there's so much more to this conversation that I think we're forgetting, right? It's not just the power imbalance between like the boss or whatever, like and the employee, right? But it's also the perception from the other employees around them, right? If there's a perception of like favorable action towards that person, right? It like totally destroys any kind of like cohesion, or destroys any kind of like facade that like, you know, your work is merit based, right? Like it doesn't even matter if that's the case, right? It's just that's what people are going to perceive, right? Like for example, right? Like a little personal anecdote for me, right? When I was in the army, right? Like the idea that you should be the people you're dating, your soldiers, is just like the worst fucking situation ever, right? In every situation that has happened around me, it always ended badly, not necessarily because like, you know, the soldier and their first line like was immature about it.
Oh my God. Don't do that, please, Dr. K. Holy shit!
Oh, sorry.
Because of the perceived like favoritism that was happening there, right? And like when that shit happens, like it just fucking makes everything worse, you know.
Okay, so Steven, do you agree with Joe with things she was saying there? I'm not saying. Hold on, and Joe, I want to be clear. I'm not even sure if I'm disagreeing with you. I don't even know my feelings on this completely. I'm just literally trying to work it out. I don't know.
Yeah. I just want to say quickly that I wasn't advocating go to HR. I was saying we need to fix the fact that HR is ineffectual and there's such a stigma around reporting issues within the workplace, and it is ineffective. So it would be better to actually change organizations than people.
Steven.
Also,
Is it
unavoidable though?
Steven.
Like, as somebody that's worked in corporate environments, I know that like we like to spread the lefty meme online that like HR is always your enemy. But that's not true. HR will protect the company, but if you've got a boss of serial fucking employees and everybody's like work is getting fucked, HR will fuck the boss. And this is coming from I've worked in these environments and I've seen this shit happen. That's one thing. So HR can absolutely help you if you've got like a predatory boss or whatever. Unless you're in a small business. And
I mean,
HR,
HR's number one thing is don't shake the boat.
We had a guy at our small little business HR thing, and any
Don't
request that
interrupt.
went to him would be just passed off to the side to save the company.
Yeah,
it was
Steven,
literally such
please.
a terrible way.
and that
Yes,
could be, so
please.
I can't vouch for small businesses. I can only tell you in corporate environments with large, like huge businesses, like they generally don't want like one dude fucking with their shit because it's gonna fuck the company hardcore. So they'll release the person being creepy. Generally, that's my experience. I guess limited. That's the first thing. Second thing is
Stop.
Second thing, Second thing, this is just a fact of life. If you disagree, you're wrong, and you'll learn when you're older. You cannot ever stop people that work together or exist together in one space for a long time from dating each other. You will never ever, short of forcibly castrating them or injecting them with something in their brain or whatever, you will never ever stop people that are working and living together. And I mean that, like if you're working 8 hours a day with somebody, that is an unimaginable amount of time. Okay, you can't stop people from fucking and dating in high school. You can't stop people from fucking dating in the workplace. It's probably better to figure out ways, as much as I don't like the idea of like boss employees dating, it's probably better to figure out like healthy ways to incorporate this and deal with this, because you're never ever going to stop it, short of like doing like all male and all female work environments and then sending gays to to some other place. Like, I don't even know how you do that, right? You're never gonna fix that problem.
So I guess maybe the response would be, so would you to Joe and Stephen, would you say that, all right, maybe we should rather just have a reporting mechanism, and then I guess the big problem from a company standpoint is multiple things, but one of them being this interfering with your work, right? Somehow this causing conflicts of interest within the company, right? And making things very difficult, like being accused of like a favoritism, right? Because see, within that context, even within that context, right? Like in the company, let's say it's not a ban, right? But like we want to make sure there's not a conflict of interest. We want to make sure that like this middle manager isn't perceived as giving like
I agree. Everything you're gonna say is 100% true. It sucks, but this happens in even friend relationships. Like, no offense, but at the end, I don't know why I said no offense, but like at the end of the work, there's always gonna be a group of people that go out and get drinks, and there's gonna be employees and managers that go out and they hang out outside of work, and there's gonna be somebody that gets hired because of their friend, blah blah. Like these types of relationships exist, and they're complicated, and they're fucking annoying sometimes, and dumb shit happens as a result of them, and it sucks. But like, you can't. Unfortunately, people are imperfect. You can't just take people and throw robotic.
But I'm saying even, even within a corporate environment, right? So like, what my response would be, okay, well, why don't we say like, you can't work directly under each other, right? And
but the thing is,
and we're running into the exact same problem, is what I'm saying, right?
I would agree with that. There should be disclosure required if you're dating a boss, and you probably can't work in the same department. Like that's too much. But like these types, even friendships will fuck with people, and even implied sexual relationships will fuck with people too. Because there are people like people will say if a manager gives a good ruling to another employee and not you, the first thing everybody says is she fucked him. I know she did that, motherfucker. Even if it doesn't exist. So like, I understand what you're saying.
And then I want to go back to you. I want to go back to you, Joe. Right? But like, we run into the exact same problem because even in that situation, just like you said, the lower status employee is probably going to be the one who has to leave, right? Like even within there, like they'll have to be shifted. So I'm trying to figure out, and maybe we can't do this on a fucking panel, but sure.
That's why you have the union.
But this is what I mean, right? This is once again a conflation of consensual relationships between adults in a workplace setting and non-consensual relationships in a workplace setting, because you're conflating those two things just by mentioning them as if they need the same sort of response, that there should be a bonk ban within workplaces. That's how I'm reading it. I understand you're shaking your head, but that's how I hear it. The other thing is you also can't have familial relationships in the workplace if that's the case. You can't have any close friends. Your friend can't be the manager of the woman that you're dating. But also on top of that, I know you're upset, but just
I'm not upset. Hold on, I didn't say anything. Hold on, I'm not upset. I didn't say anything.
I know, but you're shaking your head.
I'm allowed to shake my head. I'm
sorry. I policed what you just said. I'm sorry.
Yes, please. Hold on. No, stop. Joe, finish.
The other thing is often people who are dating and it's been disclosed and it's open will police themselves harder than people who are worried just about the appearance of things or not in a relationship, because they're so worried about the appearance of impropriety, given that their relationship is on the public record, that they will make sure they take steps to be as ethical and transparent as possible.
Yeah, so like my whole point is that like I want to be clear, I wasn't conflating to like non-consensual and consensual. I'm like saying that like the response to a consensual relationship, right? Like look, having sex with someone is different, right? It's different. So I like, you can say like, yes, friendships can also have a conflict of interest, right? But having sex with someone, being in a relationship with someone, that is different. That is like qualitatively different, right? Sure.
But what if it's my daughter? What if I have a daughter and I employ her because family businesses are everywhere? So
I agree that's problematic, but and maybe that requires a different response. Nepotism could require a different response. Yes, sure, right? But we're talking about this thing, right? And this thing in itself can be problematic, and it's a different thing.
But you're saying this thing is a problem because you're privileging someone based on a personal relationship. Yes. So surely that occurs in other relationships that are not sexual.
I understand that they do. I agree that they do. I just said that, yes, that's the case. But I'm saying that you don't think. Okay, I guess we have a fundamental disagreement on how sex can alter, and just being in, not just sex, but just being within a relationship, an intimate relationship with someone, can alter how you react to them, and that's different from simply being in a friendship with someone. Even being, it's different than even having a familiar relationship with someone. But like, Okay, maybe we just have a disagreement on how that works, and that's fine. So we'll go to Marcy.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm glad we've since I came back moved off the topic of like streamers fucking their fans, right? I'm glad we moved from that after Destiny and I had the same based and epic take. But I've got a question for Destiny here. In terms of like worker and like boss relationships, right? Do you think that there should be some sort of blanket ban on that sort of thing, or do you more go like the Joe route that we should pursue, like reforming HR departments?
I mean, I think that it should probably you should probably be required to disclose, and then those people should be separated, at least on shifts. I don't ever want to work in an environment with my supervisors dating one of my coworkers, because fuck everything about that horrible fucking bullshit. So like disclosure should be required, and then the people should probably be separated, I think.
What if they have absolutely no relation to anyone working underneath them? And I'm trying to think of an example, not to give you something that's just preposterous.
If you're literally like, if your boss is like, he's the guy that brings you the wood and your job is putting the wood in the fireplace or some shit, then sure, in a one-on-one environment, yeah. The only problem is that like other coworkers working with you, like it's like the teacher's pet on steroids, right?
Yeah,
Nobody wants to be in
nepotism.
that environment. It's toxic, and it's toxic for everybody, because the supervisor, even if the supervisor is being fair to their significant other, that significant other is still going to be looked down upon and treated horribly by the other employees, even just because of the perceived impropriety.
Marcy, finish your point.
I think my biggest problem with like this kind of discussion about like what we should do or like what we shouldn't do is we tend to think of it as like a blanket, and even more so we tend to think of it as like, okay, well, if we do this for this kind of relationships, then like what do we do for this kind of relationships and this kind of relationships? Whereas like in reality, I don't think like legislation would be passed in this field. I think it would more be like a case by case basis as to like the firms actually deciding.
You can't do that though. You can't.
Yeah,
That doesn't work in a corporate environment though, right? Like, am I incorrect in this? Like to say like, oh, just in a case by case basis, we'll take it, right? Because what one person will say, well, there's favoritism.
It compares
completely. Let the firms and the unions and the HR decide.
It's seemingly
not a
completely
blanket
dependent upon the bylaws of
governmental
the
thing.
company. Although there might be laws in different states, or I don't know about laws, but
yeah, and
you know,
I mean,
we're very fair creatures, and what people are seeking to do is be consistent. That's I agree that there needs to be nuance in the conversation, but the reason people jump to blanket stuff is that they're trying to find a consistent way that deals with the top end of the spectrum and the bottom end of the spectrum. And I'm not so sure that you can do that, because I mean, while Destiny provides a lot of reasoning and rationale around it, it's very much only applicable to middle management. Once you get to like the big boss, you take Steve Jobs. When Steve Jobs died from Apple, right? Died and moved on from Apple. Apple's share price plummeted 30-40%. That equates to jobs being lost at the bottom end. So, I mean, while you can say, oh, you inform everyone and you sign love contracts and everyone knows about it and you have these conversations about it, the reality is relationships do go bad. They do turn sour. And when they turn sour on the level of like the CEO of a massive business, like the lower level employee is always going to be sacrificed no matter what the claim is. I mean, to take a non-sexual example, Jeremy Clarkson smacked one of his producers on set on Top Gear. It resulted in Jeremy Clarkson quitting, and then his other two co-hosts quitting with him to go start the Grand Tour. And now Top Gear is a piece of shit show that like and has like 30%.
This is why you need the union.
That equates to jobs being lost. So it's not so clear that like having healthy conversations around it opens the pathway to having a sexual relationship with your boss. Because if that boss is critical to the sort of organization and making money, and that boss is in the wrong, and now you need to like fire that boss, you're not just firing that boss, you're firing that boss and the sort of 50,000 people's salaries that he supports in his endeavors.
I feel to see the point you're trying to make.
Are we still talking about relationships? And
I'm not entirely sure like what you're like referring to. It's like sorry, go ahead.
People make a very good case against a blanket ban, and I agree with most of it. But I feel that case falls down when you're talking about not just bosses, but key critical employees. You know, critical employees that if they were to do something untoward in that relationship, that HR should slap them for and say, listen, that was unacceptable, you're now fired. The firing of that individual means loss of income in certain circumstances and may lead to the laying off of 50,000 other individuals as a consequence. So
yes, Jeff Bezos should absolutely not date his employees.
Yeah,
I was gonna say, like,
I mean, I feel like to part of your point. I feel like the part of your point is that, like, yeah, because Joe, my problem is like bringing in the whole like nepotism thing, right, and those other relationships, right? Like, first of all, in corporate environments, they recognize the problem with nepotism, right? They recognize the problem with bringing in kids, at least for everyone below the CEO, right? And they ask you to at least in any corporate environment I've ever applied to, they've asked you like, oh, do you have any familiar relationships with anyone here, right? They recognize that this could be an issue, right? And we deal with it a different way. We can understand that we enter into a sexual, intimate relationship with someone in a different way than a familiar relationship, I hope, right? And there are we can understand there's different dynamics to each. So we can handle them differently, right? We can have different ways of handling them. We can understand that, right? We can understand there's a different way from handling friendships if that becomes corrosive to a corporate environment, right? So I don't think we have to be like pigeonholed and to try to figure out like something that works for everything, right? Or nothing, right? Like I feel like we can understand this is a dynamic environment, but we can also say that all these individuals' types of relationships can have their individual pitfalls and acknowledge that. Does that make sense to you, Joe?
Yeah.
And
I don't think we're agreeing a huge amount. I'm just saying that if you're basing it on power imbalance, because to be honest, I don't think that the way you enter into a relationship, outside of the fact that maybe there's a gray area in the beginning of a sexual relationship where people might not want to declare, etc. There's some messy stuff around there, but this is what you would work out if you worked in a business and you were writing this policy. I'm saying that if your concern is about people being favored because of a relationship, you can't limit that to sexual relationships. And yes, people disclose family because it's usually pretty fucking obvious when people are family and related.
Not necessarily.
Well, I mean, I'm just saying.
I can speak on this from personal.
Hold on, stop. Not necessarily.
But in any case, people who are family usually transparent about it and declare it. And so I understand you're saying everything needs a different response, but why can't you even entertain that as a response to a sexual relationship instead of jumping straight to actually nobody have sex?
I didn't say that though. I literally didn't say that. You keep putting those words in my mouth. I literally didn't say that.
Lots of people are talking, and
okay, but I want to make it clear that I've never once said that. Never once said that.
It wasn't him.
So yeah, okay, just be clear.
Don't legislate it. Leave it to the individual firms and unions and HR to decide it. Like this seems like a.
Well, yeah, I don't think we would ever have laws about like
this is by the industry and by the circumstance type thing. And with that, good night, everyone.
Okay.
So good night, Dr. K. Someone shared in the chat actually a link which I will repost now. It is going into the actual like implementation of dating policies. So one, you can have lawsuits where a supervisor who has a habit of asking subordinates out on dates, an employee who files a lawsuit after a consensual relationship goes sour, or the perception of coworkers that a supervisor is playing favorites with his or her significant other. Specifically, no dating policies also going into no dating. You actually have to define what dating is, which can be like, can two employees go to lunch together? What is it considered dating in terms of a threshold of definition? And then also there is some messiness with regards to enforcing that policy, in the sense that effectively a company could hit on an employee's privacy rights by actually trying to investigate such of a thing, because effectively you have to kind of like put a PI on your. It's very interesting. If you guys want to take a look, I linked it. What are you guys' general thoughts?
So I was going to touch on this because my family actually owns a business, so I know what this is like. From first of all, I worked for them, so I actually know what that dynamic is like. And to be fair, it is like it's a case by case basis, because some people can work, like my sister can work with my parents just fine. I can't fucking work with them. Not only because I don't like that, there is an innate kind of sense with the other coworkers, just automatically almost, that you're going to get treated differently because your family owns the place, which isn't the case for me, but it didn't matter. Like if I started as a dishwasher, which I did, or if I did whatever, but also one of the things for sure that my parents were very adamant about is no dating in the workplace. And they even, My dad or stepdad even literally fucking told one of the chicks that worked for them not to fuck with me. Like literally fucking told her. And he's explained it to me because I was like, why the hell did you do that? And he was like, because we can't, those personal relationships affect so much. It branches. Like if anything, even if good things are happening, but especially if bad things are happening, even to the point of the morale of the whole store. Because if you have like a argument with your significant other and you work with them, there's no escape, there's no like release. So you're like seeing them and you're working with them and it's reminding you, so your morale is down. So it's just not worth it for most companies to even pursue like and figure it out on a case by case basis, because it's not worth it. So he would always say, I don't want to know ever. Don't fucking bring that shit here. And if we find out that you are, then both y'all are going to get let go. But you can do it outside. If you can keep that personal and business side separate, then so be it. But it's such a difficult thing to navigate, and it just affects everything.
So I'm gonna wrap this up soon, but I want to make sure that the women have gotten the chance to talk. Hans, you want to say something? You just want to say, make it good. Hopefully, it's great.
Oh yeah. Sorry. Yeah. I was mostly like that particular second. I was waving hi to Scarlett, but in particular, yeah. I feel like we've already touched on this, and whether it's like in a capitalist social society, like I'm personally a market socialist, like it seems like you can't like really say regulate these interpersonal relationships at say like a larger level. Like I've worked in family businesses, like I've had family members like run like say like a butcher shop where like I'd process like deer and other meat, and like I've worked in say like smaller private enterprises, and in none of those, like in like the family, like obviously like I knew people inside the business, like my grandfather owned it. Inside like say the smaller enterprise, like I would like have drinks with my boss on the weekends, so like obviously like there could be a potentially like issue like based power dynamic there. It feels like in any of those like specific circumstances that all those things are supposed to be dealt with on a case-by-case basis, and that's really frustrating for people who like want to be more structural, myself included, in terms of like how you're supposed to deal with these things. I think you can say like what we talked about earlier. I think Destiny and like Marcy said this before about how like how you're supposed to have say for as a general level, like you should probably have people working in different departments. If they're like say if they disclose they have relationships, I think you can say like if you absolutely have any potential say like larger legislation or issues like on a broad-based level, issues like relationships within like say extremely small private enterprises or at the like say peaks of powerful private enterprises is extremely potentially damaging. You should probably try and limit those as much as possible. But aside from that, it seems like the best thing we can do is to have a much more open disclosure agreements in terms of relationships in the workplace. Because obviously, if you're working at a place like 8 to 12 hours a day, you're definitely going to be like, like boinking some of those people, or at least having like extremely like close friendships with a lot of those people, because that's where you spend like literally like more than half of your waking life at. So we should probably stop pretending that we're not having any sort of meaningful relationships in those places, and more just like trying to make sure that those relationships are as healthy and positive as possible. So,
okay. So let's go to oh fucking hell. All right, Socrates, I'm gonna let you in, and then we're gonna make this very quick. All right, so Socrates, make it quick. Marcy, make it quick. Whatever you're gonna have to say, right? And all right, Socrates, make it very quick.
All right, quick hot take, and then I'm off. People were talking about like lower level employees or middle management or something. Having these policies apply to them. If companies really want to like save a lot of money and a lot of headache, they should fucking microchip all their CEOs, COOs, everybody, because the amount that Google has paid, like that, I don't know, tens of millions of dollars settling these lawsuits of all these different abuses. Like these are really the people who I think probably do the most damage. But yeah, I got a cat. Got to take to the vet in the morning. So I love you guys.
All right. So next, Marcy.
I hope his cat's okay. Okay, so I was under the impression that because I have worked in a place where something like this happened, not between me, but like another employee and the manager, that like the HR department kind of had like some level of discretion in these cases, like follow along with what the company says, but they did have some kind of individual discretion. I don't know if I'm right on that. I wanted to use my last second here to ask Lucas where he linked the link.
I'll reshare that now.
Destiny, seriously, thanks for coming on for this topic. It was really kind of you to spend time with us.
Thanks. I enjoyed coming on. I like arguing about sex. So. It's called the U.S. flag, you stupid fuck. This is the only flag that the United States federally has and recognizes. Why the fuck are you acting like a different... And I love you guys. It's been fun. We're cappuccino, 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 my dude arenas. I will catch you guys next stream arena.